Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Skeleton Summoning Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The office was darkened by curtains that were drawn over the windows that lined each wall. Small lamps across the room allowed its occupants to see well enough, but shadows still dominated the space. Takahashi sat in a comfortable leather chair and peered across the desk at the man who he came to speak with. The man leaned back in his seat comfortably, his large stature causing his shoulders to stick out past the sides of the chair. His hair was greased back over his head, and his scruffy beard gave him a controlled yet rugged appearance. His hands were steepled, 2 rings on his left hand and single on his right. His left ring finger was encircled by a golden wedding band, and his left pointer supported a thick silver ring. His right pinky finger had a green jewel placed inside a gold frame. The man's black suit did little to hide the massive muscles that made up his frame. If anything, it showed that he could be dangerous both on and off of the battlefield. "You come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding to ask me this?" His slow drawl like the syrup of the whiskey that sat on the desk in front of him. "There are plenty of days in the week for this el mio amico." Takahashi stood out of his seat, his mouth hanging open to retort when the man's companions stepped from behind him to protect the man. The left one was large, his large shoulders easily as wide as the man's desk. His knuckles dragged on the floor and he wore nothing but black slacks with staining suspenders. The other was smaller and more lanky. He wore a black pinstripe suit and tie with a black fedora with a white stripe that sat slightly crooked on top of his head. His fingers gently tapped his Tommy gun. Takahashi bowed to the man. "I'm sorry, I was unaware of I." The man simply grunted, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "I understand. Timing is everything, but not all people have the correct watch." Takahashi sat back down, gulping nervously. "Please? It would mean as so much to my daughter, sir." The man gently stroked his beard, his shadowed eyes watching Takahashi carefully. Before he could respond, a voice crackled over the man's intercom. "Izuku, you promised no business today." The man sighed, and gently pressed the button. "I know la mia dolce, but it's for a good cause. I'll be down in just a minute." He leaned back in his chair once again, his eyes glowing gently in the darkness. "You want me and my boys," he gestured to his companions behind him, "to come to your daughter's birthday party?" Takahashi nodded, shaking lightly. The man hummed, standing slowly and moving around the desk to gently grasp Takahashi's shoulder. He could tell that if the man wanted to, he could easily crush his bones into a fine powder. "Why, you're her favorite hero, sir." The man smiled. "I tell you what," he moved calmly to stand behind his desk again, "as a wedding gift from me to you, we will be there. But," Takahashi's heart pounded in his chest, "if I ever need assistance, you must be ready to help me with all of your power. Capice?" Takahashi's face split into a large smile. "Of course, sir. Anything you need." The man smiled and gestured to the elevator behind Takashi. "Tell Valentina to get a contract written up and have a good day." Takahashi nodded and jogged over to the elevator, watching the number 1 hero smile his classic smile as the doors closed. 30 years earlier. "Come on, Izu!" The blonde-haired boy cried, explosions popping off of his hands like firecrackers. "Hold on, Kacchan." Izuku replied, "I'm tired." Bakugo and his friends laughed, the one with wings saying, "What should we expect of someone who hasn't gotten their quirk yet?" Izuku frowned, but pulled himself off of the ground. They were in the woods by their school playing heroes, and they were heading towards a clearing where Bakugo said that they were sure to find villains. They broke through a few bushes, and finally they saw the clearing that Bakugo had promised them. As they strode into the middle of the empty space, Izuku felt an odd feeling in his stomach. Dark clouds rolled overhead, and Izuku had the sudden urge to touch the ground where he stood. "We should go back," said the boy who could make his fingers longer. Bakugo yelled something at the boy, but Izuku wasn't paying attention. The urge to touch the ground got stronger and stronger until Izuku realized that his whole hand was pressed firmly to the dirt. They boys turned to look at Izuku, and watched as a green light passed from the middle of Izuku's back, through his arm, and down into the earth where his hand was placed. Izu, you got your quirk. Bakugo grinned. What does it do? Izuku looked up at him. I don't care. Just as he said that, a skeletal hand burst from the dirt. The boys fell on their butts as the hand pushed off of the ground, the dirt around it rising and crumbling as a full skeleton rose from the earth. Bakugo and his friends screamed and ran away as fast as they could, leaving Izuku all alone with the skeleton. It loomed over him menacingly, lightning framing its form. It then coughed out a little bit of dust and patted itself down, cleaning off the pinstripe suit that hung off its bony frame. It reached back into the hole and pulled out a black fedora with a white ribbon, placing the hat on its skull after trying to slick back its hair with a skeletal hand. Dove Sono, it said. Its two glowing yellow pupils looked at Izuku despite the skeleton having no eyeballs. Dabu, the small boy replied in shock. The skeleton's brow furrowed, something that shouldn't be possible because bones can't move, but Izuku chalked that up to it being a supernatural being. Ahem, where am I? The skeleton had a thick accent that Izuku couldn't place. It was clear that this skeleton was not from Japan. The woods, Izuku replied with a gulp. The skeleton raised one bony brow at the boy. Kosasuke nanvi? What say wrong, kiddo? You loka like Yusasi Nagasta, Izuku pointed a shaking hand at it. Why are his skeleton? The skeleton's brow lifted up and it looked down at its hands. Oh mio dio. You's right. What happened to me? What happened to Maya family? It looked around, seeing that it was only Izuku and itself in the clearing. Suddenly it gasped, causing Izuku to shake some more. That's alright. I remember now. I died. It looked at its hands and sat down in the dirt with a thump, and so did the rest of my family. Izuku watched the skeleton as it began to cry. That was when Izuku thought of something. He had just used his quirk, and the skeleton just popped out of the ground. Could it be? I think I know what happened. Izuku shouted, leaping to his feet. The skeleton sniffed and looked at the boy. What do you mean? Izuku smiled, brightening the skeleton's world. I think that my quirk brought you back to life. The skeleton's eyes widened. Do you think you can bring the rest of my family back from the dead? Izuku pumped his fist. There's only one way to find out. He ran around the clearing, putting his hand on the ground, but nothing happened. He frowned, and maybe there has to be specific conditions for it. The skeleton patted his head gently. Isa okay bambino? We can always try sometime else. Izuku nodded. We should probably go home. He looked up at the skeleton. Are you going to come with me? The skeleton stared at the boy for a few seconds before nodding. Of course bambino, after all, you died to revive the sea olda bones. Izuku giggled and grabbed the skeleton's hand. This way. Izuku started running towards the woods, but when he looked back he noticed that the skeleton was still standing in the same spot. He looked at his hand and noticed that the skeleton's hand had come off. Izuku giggled while the skeleton chuckled. Oh wait. Izuku gasped. We never introduced ourselves. The skeleton faked surprise. You were right. It's so nice to meet you. My name Isa Franciso Giuseppe, but you can just call me Frankie. Izuku smiled and shook the hand that he had taken with him. My name's Izuku Midoriya. I'll be in your care. They both laughed, and Frankie laid his non-stolen hand on Izuku's head. Lida de way bambino. Together they walked into the forest. Small time skip. Inko was worried. Izuku hadn't returned in a few hours. She tried not to get too worried because he was with Bakugo, but it was hard. That was when she heard the front door open and a voice call out, Mom. I'm home. She leapt from her chair and ran down the hall. Oh Izuku, I'm so glad that you're home. Inko saw the skeleton, screamed, grabbed Izuku, and used her quirk to yank a knife from the kitchen and into the skeleton's forehead. Izuku cried, that's my friend. Inko froze thinking that she had just killed someone before Frankie pulled the knife out of his skull. Oh mio dio. You's got quite the quirk. The small family watched as a soft green light emanated from the crack in Frankie's skull, the bones starting to fuse back together. Phew, you're okay, Izuku said, relaxing in his mother's arms. Inko looked from her son to Frankie and back. Who are you and how do you know my son? Frankie took off his hat and bowed. My name Isa Francesco Giuseppe, and I believe I'm a part of the Bambino's quirk. Inko squinted at him. What do you mean? Together Frankie and Izuku described what had happened, and Inko sat on the couch in a daze. Izuku, you got your quirk. The mother and son hugged each other and cried, Frankie smiling from his spot in the living room, his hat in his hands. If you'd let me. I'd like to style with Izuku. Inko looked up at the skeletal man and stood up. Do you promise to do your best to protect him and help him in any way you can? Frankie looked determined, con la mia vida. With my Lifia. Then welcome to the family. Izuku yelled, grabbing onto Frankie's leg. Frankie smiled and picked Izuku off of the ground, holding the boy against his hip. It's a good to be here. Izuku and Frankie went off to get themselves and their clothes cleaned up, and Inko called a quirk specialist. They needed all the help they could get. It had been a month since Izuku had resurrected Frankie, but he hadn't been able to bring back anything else. They had gone to the quirk doctor and run a bunch of tests, but they couldn't figure that part out. What they did find out, though, was that Frankie was still able to use his quirk. Frankie's quirk was called Thompson Submachine Gun, or TSG for short. It allowed him to pull a Tommy gun out of thin air and load it with any type of bullets that he wanted. He could also pull the ammo out of the air. Izuku had initially been put off by this, but Frankie had told him that he commonly used stun rounds, or beanbags instead of live ammunition. This made Izuku jump for joy, listing off how cool Frankie would be as a hero. Besides that, the quirk doctor couldn't help them figure out anything else. Every day for 29 days, Frankie and Izuku walked to the place where Frankie and his family, as he put it, had died. While Frankie walked, Izuku rode on his shoulders. Every day for 29 days Izuku tried to revive someone else. And every day for 29 days he failed. Izuku was about to give up hope when Frankie convinced him to try one more time. I got a good feeling about this one. Izuku slumped against Frankie's hat, flattening it against his skull. The skeleton laughed and patted his leg. Frankie had insisted on following Izuku everywhere, including to school. It had taken quite a lot of paperwork, but finally the school allowed Frankie to come with Izuku as long as he didn't interfere with the students' learning. The other kids had been weary of Frankie at first, but after him being there for a few days and just being weird, they naturally got a little curious. Some of the children had grown to like Frankie, while others like Bakugo didn't care for the skeletal mobster. The duo finally reached Frankie's not-so-final resting place and Frankie set Izuku on the ground. Izuku sat there for a few seconds, not feeling anything. He was about to ask Frankie to carry him home when he got that feeling again. That irresistible urge to lay his hand onto the ground so that the dead can live again. Before he could, however, Frankie lifted him off of the ground. Not there il mio amico. I have a very specific person I want to use to wake up. Izuku squirmed, the feeling growing overwhelming. Frankie held him gently as he walked around before finding the spot that he wanted. Thesa should be Duplicia. Go wild, Bambino. Izuku slapped his palm onto the ground, and felt a rush of energy thrum through his hand and into the ground beneath him. It was peaceful for a second, before the ground rumbled underneath Izuku. Frankie grabbed the boy under his arms and moved him out of the way. Suddenly a fist the size of Izuku erupted from the earth. Perfetto! Frankie cried out. Izuku watched, entranced, as a giant pulled itself from dirt. Fratello! Oh mio Dio! Sono così felice di rivederti. I missed you so mucho, brother. Frankie exclaimed, setting Izuku down and wrapping the large skeleton in a hug. As the giant hugged back, Izuku took a good look at him. He wore nothing but a pair of black slacks with suspenders that strained to keep the pants on the huge skeleton. His arms were massive, as thick as the largest trees in the forest. He had legs that were short for a person of his stature, but Izuku still didn't come up to even halfway to his knees. He was easily larger than all might and endeavor, standing at around 2.5 meters tall, 8'2" for us Americans, and his shoulders were as broad as Frankie was tall. His ribs were big enough for two Izukus to sit in comfortably, and his canines and knuckles were very pronounced. His intelligent glowing gray eyes glanced up at Izuku and studied him carefully. Frankie pulled away from the mountain of a man and kissed both cheeks. Roberto! Mi sei mancata! How are you feeling? The now named Roberto gave the skeleton a thumbs up before nodding at Izuku. Frankie slapped a bony hand to his forehead. Ha! How could I forgeta? The bambino Isa Izuku Midoriya. He essayed a one wo revived us. Izuku, dis Isa my brother, Roberto Giuseppe. Shlo, Izuku said, waving at the large skeleton. Roberto waved back, his eyes glowing like soft coals. Oh, he don't say much bambino, so I don't take it to a heart when he don't respond, Frankie said, patting his brother's arm just above the shoulder. He has a gorilla mutation. Gets it from our madre, de lucky sono figuna. Frankie winked, something that Izuku was still getting used to. After all, how did he wink? Bones shouldn't move like that. No. Let's go home. We gotta talk to your mama about our discovery. Frankie said, Roberto, how about you give the bambino a ridia, huh? Roberto nodded, holding out a hand that Izuku could easily sit in. Izuku gently climbed into the man's hand, and he lifted him onto his shoulders. Izuku sat himself down on Roberto's clavicle bone like he was sitting on the monkey bars. From this height, Izuku could touch the tree branches by just reaching up. He had to scramble for somewhere to hold onto as Frankie and Roberto began walking, Roberto using his knuckles to lift himself off of the ground and swing forwards. Izuku began to mumble about how similar Roberto was to a real gorilla, and his body shook with the force of Roberto's quiet laughter. Izuku smiled and patted Roberto on his head, admiring the view. Life was about to get a lot more interesting. Time skipped a month. It took even more paperwork to allow Roberto to follow Izuku around with his brother. Most of the time he just waited outside the room that Izuku was in. The kids were even more intimidated by Roberto, but the ones who warmed up to Frankie found out that Roberto was even better than their jungle gym. After all, this one could move. And juggle. After learning that Izuku's quirk could only really work once a month, the growing family went back to the quirk doctor's office to get his file changed. His quirk was officially dubbed Monthly Resurrection, and he was required to register any new skeleton with the quirk registry. The Giuseppe brothers took Izuku back to their death site, something pretty morbid now that they thought about it, before it was time for his quirk to activate. This time Frankie had no real clue who to revive. I don't know. I just wanted my brother back. Roberto finally huffed and moved to stand over one spot. He patted the ground, causing Frankie's bones to rattle and Izuku to bounce off the ground. There? Izuku stood over the spot and felt his quirk swell inside him. He pushed his palm flat to the dirt, and energy rushed from him into the earth. Roberto gently scooped Izuku out of the way as a hand pushed its way through the dirt. Surprisingly, a red head of long hair popped out of the dirt next. Ugh! A feminine voice grunted as the skeleton rose from the dirt. Giuseppe, I swear to Dio if you're behinda dis illa dash. She stopped as she caught sight of Frankie holding his hat in his hands and looking at the ground. Ciao, Viola. It's good to see you. Izuku looked at Roberto in confusion, but the giant just pointed at the two skeletons. Giuseppe, what happened? We were just She stopped and looked around. Where Isa everyone? Frankie's body shook with silent sobs. Loro sono morti, Viola. We all are. Viola looked at her hands, then to Roberto. He waved slowly to her and set Izuku down. Oh. But. Frankie said, putting his hat on and walking quickly to stand behind Izuku. Dis bambino hasa revived us. I say we rebuilded a family and have him lead us. What do yous think? He wrung his hands nervously. Viola kneeled in front of Izuku. Her piercing crimson eyes watched him carefully. What is your name, Bambino? Midoriya, ma'am, Izuku said, shyly looking down as he messed with the hem of his shirt. Viola was silent for a few seconds before she spoke. If Frankie, lay do it. Frankie's lit up, plopping his hat back on his head and letting out a whoop. I knew you'd be on aboard. Roberto huffed, hitting Frankie on the back so hard he almost fell apart. I Miana, we knew you'd be on aboard. Roberto rolled his eyes and held out his hand to Viola. She shook it with a smile. Always good to see you's Rabito. Frankie started complaining about how Viola was rude to him. Meanwhile Viola yelled at him in Italian about how he shouldn't been such a moron. Fina she wouldn't have to assume he died of something wronga alda to Mia. Izuku laughed behind his hands. He had a feeling he was going to have a good life. While I should hand out these high school application forms, Izuku's teacher said before tossing them into the air, I know that you all want to be heroes. The class erupted into chaos, people throwing quirks around like crazy. Don't lump me in with the rest of these extras, teach. I'm gonna be the world's #1 hero. Maybe eine million years a Baku brat, Frankie said under his breath. Frankie, per favor non farlo. We don't want to antagonize him, Izuku said, tapping the skeleton's ribcage with the back of his hand. Certo, Capo, Bakugo glared at the two, not understanding their conversation. That was when the bell rang. The teacher called out over the chattering class as they packed their bags, telling them of their homework. Izuku remained seated, Frankie packing his bag for him. After all of the other kids left the classroom, Izuku stood up and walked with Frankie out of the room. There they met up with Roberto, who lumbered down the hall with them. When they reached the bottom floor, they heard some shouting coming from an empty classroom. Izuku snapped and pointed towards the door where the yelling was coming from. Frankie smiled and Roberto rolled his shoulders. You're useless. Why don't you go jump off of the roof and pray for a quirk in your next life? Bakugo said, leaning over the younger student as his lackeys laughed. The plain girl cowered on the ground, praying to every god that she knew to help her. It wasn't a god that helped her, but she was grateful all the same. That's enough, Bakugo. The blonde turned around, already fuming. There stood Izuku Midoriya, his hair slicked back, his clothes immaculate, and his black dress shoes making a satisfying click on the floor as he walked forwards with his skeletal companions. The girl immediately got up and ran over to the group. Bakugo tried to reach for her, but was grabbed instead by Roberto. The giant lifted him an inch off of the floor, a growl building in his chest and rattling the desks closest to him. Now, Roberto, put him down, I'm sure we can solve this, amicably. Bakugo was lowered to the floor and Izuku brushed off his shoulders and straightened his outfit. There, that's better. He slung an arm around Bakugo's shoulders and pulled him close. Listen, you see her? He points at the girl who was being guarded by Frankie. She's one of my friends. You don't want to mess with my friends, Bakugo, because that means messing with me. You understand? Bakugo growled at him but didn't move. Now, you take this and go play some video games with your friends, eh? Izuku said, slipping a 10,000 yen note into his BRST pocket. The blonde slapped Izuku's arm off of him and walked out, his followers trailing after him like dogs with their tails between their legs. Izuku, such a shame that one, good quirk, smarts, horrible personality. The girl moved to stand in front of him, lifting his hand and pressing her lips softly to his knuckles. Thank you, Capo, sir. Izuku pet her head gently. Oh la mia piccola amica. You know that kissing my knuckles is only for business. This was just helping a friend in need. The girl blushed and nodded. Izuku smiled and guided her out of the room, Frankie and Roberto following closely behind him. Now you listen to me, Kohai. If Bakugo ever gives you trouble again, don't be afraid to come find me. I'll have my boys sort him out. The girl nodded and thanked him once more before running off. Izuku sighed as he and the Giuseppe brothers began walking down the street. Normally they would take the limo, but with Izuku's quirk about to activate, they didn't want to take the chance of his body forcing him to jump out of the car to revive something. They were passing under a bridge when they heard some strange sounds. Izuku stopped, raising his hand to let the brothers know that something wasn't right. That was when sludge began oozing out of a manhole, making the place reek of sewage. Izuku lifted a brow even as Frankie summoned his Tommy gun and Roberto cracked his knuckles. Good, a medium-sized skin suit, the slime said, a face floating up from somewhere. Can I take him out, Capo? No, I want to use this as a training exercise. I'll handle it, Izuku said. The sludge villain looked confused until he saw it. Izuku's skin, muscles, and hair peeled away, starting at his hands, the top of his head, and his feet, though he couldn't see that. It slithered away, disappearing into a spot on his back to reveal milk-white bones. His eyes no longer had eyeballs, but they did have two glowing green pupils. He held out his hands, and a Tommy gun appeared in them. He leveled it at the slime villain who just laughed. That was gross, but guns have no effect on Dash. Before he could continue, an explosive round sunk into his chest with a plop. The villain exploded everywhere, Izuku being shielded by Roberto's giant hand. Izuku sighed, his skin unfolding from the same spot on his back and recovering his body again. I shoulda used a frost round, huh? Frankie nodded solemnly and Roberto grunted in agreement. They had found out that Izuku was capable of turning into a skeleton and copying the quirks of the first 4 skeletons that he had managed to revive when he was about 5. They'd a nasty run-in with a villain, and Izuku showed him why you don't mess with a toddler that has the strength of a gorilla. Suddenly the manhole cover burst open, and a large figure climbed out. Have no fear because I am here. All Might stood proud in all his glory, and saw that the situation was completely under control. It seemed to take the wind out of his sails, but he quickly recovered. Thank you for taking down this villain for me. He was very elusive. Izuku nodded and held out a pen and paper. Of course, All Might, if it's not too much trouble, could I have your autograph? All Might gave him a thumbs up. Sure. Who should I make this out to? Izuku smiled. Make it out to Valentina if you wouldn't mind. All Might raised an eyebrow, but shrugged. People have weird names. He handed it back to Izuku and took 2 soda bottles full of the sludge villain from Frankie. I'll be off now. Have a good day. And with a salute, he was gone. The boys continued on their walk, almost at their destination when it happened. Izuku grunted as his quirk made itself known. You'd think that it woulda get a better over time. Izuku scowled at Frankie as his body led him over to a patch of concrete. He laid his hand on the concrete, and the light zipped into the ground. They waited for a few seconds before the pavement began to crack. After a minute of watching their concrete egg crack, something strange happened. A head popped out. Then another. Then another. Even stranger was the fact that they weren't human heads. A large dog skeleton climbed its way out of the hole and began wagging its tail. Izuku looked down into 3 sets of glowing red-orange puppy dog eyes and knew there was nothing he could do to stop this. Another odd thing was that the heads all had ghostly red-orange tongues that would hang out whenever they opened their mouths. The dog was big. Its shoulders were level with the bottom of Izuku's ribcage, and its heads could lick his shoulders if they wanted to. It had large spikes where its ears would have been, flat on the outside and round on the inside. Its feet had large claws the size of Izuku's hand, and its teeth were like steak knives. Izuku scratched its middle head, one of its back feet thumping on the ground behind it. I think I'll call you Cerberus. The dog heads woofed simultaneously, fire rolling out of their mouths and causing Izuku to hop back. Cerberus's tail drooped for a second before Izuku started laughing. That's interesting. A dog with 3 heads and a quirk. Looks like we hit the jackpot, huh boys? Frankie laughed with him while Roberto just gently patted the dog's 3 heads with one hand. They continued their walk, now throwing a stick and watching as Cerberus ran to get it. It was funny to watch as each head fought over which got to hold the stick until the middle one got too worked up and burned the stick with its fire breath. Cerberus looked sad after that, so they started throwing 3 sticks so that each head could have one. That had much better results. Finally they made it to their destination, Dagoba Beach. The once polluted trash head had been cleaned by Izuku's gang, now known simply as the Midoriya family. Throughout Mustafu, when he was around they figured they needed a base of operations, and since this place wasn't being used, they would take it. After cleaning the beach they had persuaded some local officials to give them permits to do what they wanted with the beach and one of the nearby abandoned buildings. They came upon a deserted food stand labeled S&P's Food. Izuku sighed and raised his hand to his mouth. Putting his pointer and middle finger into his mouth in a circular shape, he whistled loudly. Cerberus shook his head and began sniffing around the food stand. Yo boss, what do you need? A squat skeleton with a big blue hoodie asked as he approached from the opposite direction. Izuku glared at him. Where have you been? And where's your brother? The skeleton sighed. I was on a smoke break, and I think he went to get some more supplies. You can't smoke, you're a skeleton, Izuku said annoyed. The skeleton merely shrugged and leapt onto the counter, pulling himself up and almost over to the other side, his glowing blue eye looking at Izuku out of the corner of the socket. Little help. Izuku sighed and pushed him up and over the counter. That was when another skeleton came bounding over to them with arms full of groceries. That better not all be for spaghetti, Izuku warned. The other skeleton paused in his tracks. He wore a white outfit with gold accents on his joints. He had a red scarf, red gloves, red shoes, and blue boxers that sat outside of his pants. Of course not. There's also Yuch. The skeleton's silver pupils slowly drifted to the left before snapping back to Izuku. Ingredients for lasagna. Izuku just sighed and left. Keep up the work, boys. They both voiced their agreement with different levels of enthusiasm, and Izuku and his group left for the nearby office building. As they entered the building, Izuku saw someone standing at the front desk speaking with Angelo, the main secretary of the office. He was a large man who had gotten his skull tattooed after he had been revived. The first being a large green dragon that curled around his eyes to symbolize that he was Izuku's eyes in the office. The girl had a bob cut of light brown hair. Her cheeks were adorned with permanent blush marks, and her smile lit up the room. Ochako, it's good to see you, Izuku called, opening his arms wide. Ochako looked at him and smiled. Aizu. Sorry for dropping by unexpectedly. When they reached each other, Izuku gave her a hug and slipped his arm to rest on her shoulders. What are you doing here? Nothing went wrong with the construction site, I hope? Izuku looked around for her parents, but couldn't see them. No. I'm just in Mustafa looking for apartments to move into if I get into UA, so I figured I'd drop. But, you see, the skeletons of the Midoriya family needed work to bring in money for the family. Most places wouldn't take them, seeing as they were skeletons and all, but finally they found the Urarakas. The Urarakas would contract them for work that needed to get done quickly because the skeletons never needed breaks. This allowed them to work through the night and get jobs done in half of the time. The Urarakas and Midoriyas became very good friends during that time, and would regularly have dinners together, seeing as how the skeleton crews literally pulled the Urarakas out of poverty because of their notoriety. Izuku beamed. Really? Let me help with that. Ochako looked confused. Angelo, can you call Isabella for me? The tattooed skeleton nodded and hit a few buttons before handing the phone to Izuku. Hello, Isabella? I need you to write up a contract for me. The woman on the other side of the phone asked a few questions to which Izuku responded. I need to rent out one of our finest single-bedroom suites to the young lady down here with me. I want it free of charge as long as she attends UA High School. If she chooses not to, then give her the family discount. Capice? Excellent. Come down and get her signature after you're done writing it up. He handed the phone back to Angelo and motioned for the Giuseppe brothers and Cerberus to follow him. Ochako looked at him in shock as he boarded the elevator. She looked like she was about to say something, but the doors closed before she could. Frankie hit the button that led to the top floor, the elevator whooshing up at a fast pace. When they reached the top floor, the doors opened with a cheerful ding. Izuku and the boys stepped off of the elevator and began walking towards the two sets of doors in the middle of the large hall. The side on the left was Izuku's office space, and the side on the right was where Izuku, his mother, the Giuseppes, and Viola lived. Viola was out on some business, and would be traveling again once the entrance exams rolled around, but Izuku was excited to have her in his little group again after school started up. When they reached the doors, Izuku stopped. Frankie, would you mind introducing Cerberus to Mama? I gotta review some things before I'm ready to finish the day. Frankie nodded enthusiastically. No problem, a capo, he whistled. Another thing that he shouldn't be able to do with his skeletal body, but Izuku learned to just go with it. Cerberus bounded along as Frankie excitedly entered the home side. After being revived, Midoriya quickly had all of the skeletons' respect and love. Getting to see her was the highlight of some of their days. Right after seeing Izuku, of course. Izuku led the way into the left doors, Roberto following behind him. The next room was a spacious waiting room with plush sofas, nice wooden tables, and of course a secretary's desk. Ciao capo, how was your day? Asked the skeletal woman behind the desk. She was wearing a nice gray pantsuit and had her blonde hair tied up into a bun. Her pale pink eyes glowing softly from her eye sockets. It was alright, had to deal with Bakugo. He was picking on a quirkless girl, Izuku answered in Italian. Oh no, not poor little Emika. The secretary gasped, that brutish little brat. If I ever get my hands on him I'll. What followed next was a stream of Italian curses that Izuku was sure his mother would disapprove of. There was an upside though, Izuku said, reaching into his backpack. Take a look, Valentina. Valentina took the paper from Izuku and squealed. A real-life authentic autograph from All Might. And it's addressed to me. Valentina swooned, holding the page to her chest before getting up and wrapping the boy in a hug. Oh, Izuku, thank you. Izuku patted her back. You're welcome. I'm going to head into my office. Could you have the researchers who were looking into that thing bring up their files? I want to take a look at it. Valentina nodded happily. Of course, Izu. I'll get on that right away. You always did know how to get what you wanted, didn't you? She giggled, walking over to her desk. Izuku smiled, lighting up the room. I couldn't have done it without you guys. Come on, Roberto. I need your help deciding some things. Izuku finished up his, very easy, homework, and admired the view while he waited for his data to arrive. His office was large, and glass windows made up 3 of the 4 walls. To his left was the ocean and to his right was Mustafa. Finally, Valentina opened the door and walked up to his desk to set down a folder full of documents. Would you like some snacks or drinks while I'm not at my desk? She asked. Izuku smiled. If you could get me some hot coffee, that would be great. You know how I like it. Valentina nodded and bowed out of the room. Izuku looked at the file for a second before calling over Roberto. The giant took his place next to Izuku, a special stool placed under one side of the desk allowing him to sit comfortably. They went over some plans, Roberto pointing at things that he saw needed work. After a while, Izuku yawned and stretched. Thanks for your work as always, Roberto. I got it from here. The giant nodded and patted Izuku on the head before walking to the door and leaving. Izuku looked out over Mustafa, specifically 2 parts. One was the massive UA building perched high on its hill. It overlooked the city as a beacon of heroics. The other was an unassuming area that Izuku knew all too well. He looked at the picture of a little girl with white hair in his hand. Don't worry, he said as he looked over the city once more. I'm coming. The folder on his desk was labeled in bold red letters, Ihasekai. Staring up at the UA building from the ground was much different than from his office. His office made it look like a toy, a tiny model that would have choking hazard written all over it. From where Izuku stood now, it looked much larger and much more imposing. Izuku! A familiar voice woke him from his thoughts. He looked down and smiled. Ah, hello Ochako. How are you this morning? Today was the day of the entrance exams, so Ochako had stayed in the apartment that Izuku had rented to her. I'm good. That suite you gave me is super cool. Have you been there? The two walked towards the main building, the Giuseppes and Cerberus following them. Of course, I make sure to go over all of the buildings that we buy out. It can be taxing to go to every room, but I want to make sure that we aren't getting a bum deal, Izuku replied, fixing one of his cuffs. Ochako had been unsurprised to see Izuku dressed in a full black suit and tie, as he almost always was. They had to split up to take the written exam, but not without Ochako promising to come over and have dinner with Izuku and his mother. The skeletons couldn't eat, so they just sat there politely and made conversation. Izuku wasn't worried about the test. He ran a business on top of going to school and all of the other things he did. A test would be the least of his worries. After he finished the test faster than the rest of the kids in the room, he left to find his seat in the auditorium. He scratched Cerberus's heads as he watched students enter the room. One student took notice of him and stalked over. Excuse me, but there are no pets allowed in this exam. Also you too, he said, chopping his arm at Frankie and Roberto. You should find your seats if you are taking this exam. This is an important matter, and if you cannot take that seriously, then I suggest you leave. Frankie opened his mouth to say something when Izuku spoke up. These are my companions, they are part of my quirk and thus have no seats to find, Illinois mio amico. Now please sit down before I have to ask your brother to come pick you up, Tenya Ida. The boy looked down at Izuku with wide eyes. How? I've worked with your brother on several occasions. You would know me as Capo if he ever spoke about me. Ida seemed to realize what was going on. W? But you're just a kid. Izuku sighed. Yes, but I've been leading my family since I was age doesn't matter in a field of experience, Ida. Now find your seat if you wouldn't mind. Ida walked away robotically, finding his chair a few rows back. Unfortunately, Bakugo was seated right next to the group, and he threw glares their way constantly. Thankfully present Mike took that time to get on stage. Is everyone ready for this exam? Let me hear you say yeah. Sithi. Frankie called from behind Izuku. The boy, as well as all of the other testers, turned to look at the skeleton. Excuse, you are my favorite hero. I couldn't resist. He rubbed the back of his skull, somehow blushing up a storm. Present Mike just laughed. Well, thanks my bony listener. I appreciate the enthusiasm. Frankie clutched his cheeks and turned away, muttering as present Mike continued, telling the students of the point system. When you're done having your panic, could you quiet Frankie? Izuku asked, watching Bakugo glare at him while two female students behind him giggled. Izuku winked at them, causing them to giggle some more, before tapping Frankie's ribcage. This calmed the skeleton down a little, though his cheeks were still flushed red. And remember, go beyond. Frankie wasn't alone this time, as most of the audience called out, plus ultra. The bus driver didn't know what to do with Roberto when they arrived to take his bus to their testing site, but Izuku assured him that Roberto would be fine. Before the driver could ask what that meant, Roberto fell into pieces that hopped up into the bus. Izuku smiled, patting the shocked bus driver on the shoulder as they passed by. The ride to the testing area was relatively short, Izuku talking with Frankie about their battle plans. When they made it to the site, the students flowed out of the bus and spread out. They chatted amongst themselves in hushed tones as they warmed up for what was to come. Izuku saw some interesting mutations as he stretched. Finally present Mike yelled out, "Start." The students looked up at him in confusion until he said, "There are no countdowns in real life. Look, those guys got it." The testers turned to the gates where Izuku, the Giuseppe brothers, and Cerberus were sprinting into the arena. The rest of the teens chased after them. The gangs split up after entering the testing area, Roberto swinging from building to building like they were trees, Frankie pumping lead into any robot that he could come across, and Cerberus tearing apart all robots in sight. Izuku himself continued to run deeper into the area. He wanted to find the places where less students would be around. Finally he got away from the rest of the herd, and decided to get some practice in with Viola's quirk. His skin and muscles retreated into his back, and electricity pulsed between his fingers. He pointed his finger like a gun at a two-pointer. With a zap, the robot exploded. Viola's quirk was called Static Hands, and it allowed her to shoot and conduct lightning out of her hands. Izuku was very thankful that the first 4 skeletons that he revived had great quirks. The exam passed by quickly, Izuku racking up many points, and knowing that his family would be gaining him a lot of points helped to set his mind at ease. He was heading back towards the entrance because the test was almost over when it happened. The zero-pointer that present Mike had been talking about rose from the ground, its giant head peeking above the buildings. Izuku continued to jog without paying it much mind. "Ow!" she cried, her legs stuck under a large piece of rubble. The zero-pointer looked over at her, and she knew that this was not going to end well. It reared back its fist and launched it at her. She watched as her death sailed down from above. That was when a skeletal man stood in front of her and held up his hand. The zero-pointer's fist made contact with the man's hand. But instead of pasting the pavement with his bones, the zero-pointer's arm rocketed back. It flew off of its shoulder, crashing into a building and toppling over. 2 glowing green pinpricks looked down at her as the glowing green markings cooled on the skeleton's face. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to form words. The skeleton smiled. "Well, let's get that off of you." She saw the robot's other hand coming from the side to swat the boy like a bug. He didn't even look as it slammed into him. The green markings on his face glowed a vibrant green as the arms snapped back, the robot's hand broken beyond repair. The skeleton dusted his suit and began to shift, and the markings left his face. His shoulders grew broader, arms extending, and his hands becoming large enough to wrap around her body. His suit strained, but held on incredibly. He grabbed the large chunk of concrete off of her, and spun around. The zero-pointer had been about to attack again when it got pelted in the face by the large piece of rubble. It struggled to remain standing, bracing itself against a nearby building. It reached its feet just as another piece of rubble hit it in the chest. It skidded backwards a little, but before it could move again, Present Mick's voice rang out, "Time's up." Head back to the entrance, everyone. Izuku allowed his body to return to its natural state, his skin slithering back into place once he was his regular size again. He turned to look at the girl that he had saved, her green hair tied into a bow and her eyes wide. "How are you feeling, Bella? Your leg okay?" She croaked and looked down at her very long leg. She shook her head. "Oh, Karo, I think my ankle might be broken." Izuku frowned and approached her leg. "I'm going to touch it, is that okay?" The girl nodded, and he gently set his hands on her ankle. "Tell me about yourself, Bella. What's your name?" She watched him intently. "My name is Tsuyu Azui, but you can just call me Tsu." Karo. Izuku smiled. "Well, Tsu, your ankle isn't broken, but it is sprained. I'll have one of my companions help you out." Tsu had been so distracted by his warm green eyes and confident smile that she hadn't noticed him gently touching and moving her ankle. Izuku held his hand up to his mouth and let loose a piercing whistle. "Oh yeah," he said, looking down at her. "My name is Izuku Midoriya." Tsu's eyes widened at the family name, recognizing it. That was when Cerberus came bounding down the street barking excitedly. He ran up to Izuku and nuzzled against him. "Cerberus, find Roberto and Frankie for me, would you?" The dog barked with all three heads and began sniffing around before he ran off. "You're not going to leave?" Kuro, Tsu asked. Izuku shook his head and helped her into a sitting position. "Of course not. What sort of hero would I be if I did?" He looked her up and down, studying her in a way Tsu could tell was an ex. "What is your quirk, if you don't mind me asking?" Tsu grimaced internally. A lot of people thought her quirk was gross. After all, who would like a frog? "My quirk is called Frog. It gives me all of the properties of a frog." Izuku nodded, humming. "That sounds good. It's a mutation, yes?" Tsu croaked an affirmative. "Well, I don't think I've ever seen a prettier mutation." Tsu croaked in surprise before a large skeleton similar to Izuku's earlier transformation knuckled its way towards them. Roberto! Could you pick up La Bella Ragazza for me?" The giant nodded, gently scooping Tsu into his large palm. Izuku walked beside the large man as they made their way towards the exit. "Many find mutations as ugly," Izuku said, Tsu looking over at the boy, "but I find that they are beautiful. Isn't that right, Roberto?" He patted the giant's arm and smiled, lighting up Tsu's whole world. Roberto grunted in agreement. "Teresa, yous guys are. Disa Puppo hasa been dragging me all over de Placia." Frankie groaned as one of Cerberus's heads pulled him along by his sleeve. "Ha," Izuku laughed. "Well, Tsu, meet Francesco Giuseppe. Frankie meets you Azui." Frankie held out a hand, saying, "Nissia to meet yous." Tsu shook his hand and croaked, "So Midoriya, what is your quirk?" "It seems complicated." Karo, Izuku smiled at her again. "It's got a lot of parts. Basically, I can revive something dead once a month, and I can turn into a skeleton and use the quirks of the first 4 people I revived. Frankie and Roberto here were the first 2 that I resurrected." Tsu looked at the 2 skeletons. It was obvious that Roberto's quirk was what he had used to free her from the rubble. "So your quirk is that thing that allowed Midoriya to get hit by the 0-pointer? Tsu asked Frankie, touching a finger to her chin. "No, that saw the quirk of the 4th skeleton that Izuku raised from the dead," Frankie said, a slight scowl forming on his face. Tsu croaked in confusion, looking at Izuku. Izuku gave her a half-smile. "That's the quirk of one of my other companions. His name is Kengo too, and his quirk is rubber and glue. Basically, when he uses it, it reflects any damage done to the user onto the person or thing inflicting the damage." "That seems powerful, Karo," Tsu said. Izuku smiled a little. "Yes, but if you use it for more than about 30 seconds it gives massive headaches and randomly turns off. The brothers here don't like Ken. You see, the Giuseppes and the Yakuza had a fight about 60 years ago. Ken was Yakuza. He was what killed many of the Giuseppes, including Frankie." Tsu looked at the skeleton in question. He wore a sour scowl, looking away. "Now though, he's part of our family, and most of them get along. Frankie and Ken still fight most of the time, so Ken takes the jobs that require being away from home for a long time." Tsu was impressed that Izuku could bring together old enemies the way he did. "So are you the boss's son or something?" Tsu asked as they finally found the gate where Recovery Girl was treating injuries. Izuku laughed. No, I am the boss. Sue's jaw nearly dropped as Roberto set her on the ground. Recovery girl, her ankle is sprained, could you heal her up? The heroine raised an eyebrow. Of course I can. How did you know that her ankle was sprained, Sonny? Izuku gestured to the skeletons by his sides. I have a lot of experience with bones. Recovery girl gave Sue a kiss on the head and called over some robots to take her to the nurse's office. She wanted to make sure that everything healed properly just in case. Izuku waved to her, saying, I hope to see you in class, Sue. The girl waved back tiredly and fell asleep as the robots carried her off. Izuku got his acceptance letter at a poor time. He was busy with some paperwork when Valentina entered carrying his letter. Frankie, can you read this for me please? Izuku asked, handing the letter to the skeleton. Of course, boss, Frankie replied, opening the envelope and letting the contents fall into his palm. A black disc and a letter fell into his hand. The disc burst to life, All Might being projected as a hologram. I am here. As a projection. Izuku sighed and set down his very important work to watch the hero talk about his results. You may be wondering what I'm doing here. Well, I will be teaching at UA this upcoming year. Now for your scores. Young Midoriya, you achieved almost a perfect score on the written exam, something that shocked many teachers at UA. On the practical exam, you and your compatriots earned a total of 114 villain points, almost beating my score of 123. At this, Izuku made a small frown. He didn't particularly care about beating the number 1 hero in this test, but it would have been nice. But that isn't all. There was a secret point system, rescue points. For saving many other students, including one TC, you were given 86 points, decimating my score with a clean 200 points. Welcome to your hero academia. Izuku smiled at his final score. He felt proud at his accomplishment, but he still had to work. Frankie, please go tell Mama that I beat All Might's score if you would. Frankie smiled and nodded, setting the letter down on Izuku's desk for later and rushing out the door. Izuku paused and looked at Roberto, who was petting Cerberus. What do you think, Roberto? Is UA going to be fun? Roberto looked thoughtful for a moment before nodding. Izuku smiled, his eyes glowing faintly. He couldn't wait. Time skip. The students that saw Izuku and the Giuseppe brothers arrive at UA in their limo were wary of the boy. Most of them recognized the signature skeletal nature of the Midoriya family, and they knew that this boy was important in some way. If Izuku was disheartened by this, he didn't show it. He calmly walked towards his classroom, having memorized the layout of the school beforehand. He opened the door to see Bakugo and the youngest Ida fighting. He rolled his eyes at the scene and entered the room. He observed the other students in the class. A boy with a raven's head caught his eye, a mountain of a boy who looked nervous made him smile a bit, and finally a young lady with black hair waved at him. Ciao, Yaoyorozu, how are you today? The girl in question smiled at him. I'm doing well, thank you for asking, Midoriya. How are you? Before Izuku could answer, a croak stopped him. Karo, it's you? Izuku looked and saw Tsu from the exam standing at the door. The room went quiet, and despite her stoic expression, Izuku could see that Tsu was uncomfortable. Hello, Tsu, why don't you join Yaoyorozu and I in our conversation? Izuku said, hinting to the rest of the class that this was private. Tsu nodded and walked over to the two teens. Before they could start talking, a brown-haired girl bounced over to them. Hey Izuku, who are these guys? Uraraka asked, flashing a blinding smile to the three students. This is Momo Yaoyorozu. I met her while at an investors gala for a company that I have a hand in, and this is Tsuyu Azui. I met her during the entrance exam. Uraraka smiled at the two ladies and waved at them. Hello, I'm Ochako Uraraka. Izuku has worked with my family for a long time, so we're good friends. Tsu had a strange expression on her face, and Yaoyorozu's smile seemed a little strained. If you're here to have a tea party, then I suggest going back to kindergarten. This is a place for heroes in training, not children, a gruff voice called from the door. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the large caterpillar-like creature in the door frame. It stood up and unzipped itself to reveal a familiar figure to Izuku. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, that will need to be improved. I am Shoyuda Aizawa, your homeroom teacher. Put these on and meet me outside, you have 10 minutes, the man dropped some gym uniforms on his desk and walked out. Izuku was the first to move. He grabbed his uniform and quickly left. Normally he would take his time, but he was loath to anger his teacher so early in the year. The other boys began entering as he found his locker. He was taking off his shirt when one of them noticed it. "Wow. Are you allowed to have tattoos?" That drew the attention of all the boys in the locker rooms. Izuku looked at them over his shoulder. "In Japan? No, but I got this in Italy, so it was all right." Izuku neatly folded his shirt and set it in his locker. "What do each of these dark markings represent?" the raven-headed boy asked. Izuku smiled a bit. "It is the Grim Reaper. In his right hand is the Sword of Truth, as I never tell a lie. In his left is a pocket watch, representing the limited time you have on this earth." Once he was finished speaking, Izuku pulled his gym shirt over his head and walked towards the door. "Now you should all finish getting dressed or our teacher will perdir le su big lie." His classmates began to scramble, causing Izuku to chuckle. He left the room, feeling a little uncomfortable in something that wasn't a suit. He was the first to reach the fields where Aizawa was waiting. The man gave him a small scowl but didn't say anything. Slowly the other students wandered onto the field, most looking confused. Izuku studied each of them carefully, looking for signs of their quirks. Finally everyone was present, and Aizawa began speaking. "We will be doing a quirk apprehension test. Schools do not allow students to use their quirks, but that is foolish. Midoriya, you hold the highest score on the entrance exam of all time. Take this." He held out a ball to Izuku. Izuku knew that the man was trying to distance him from his classmates to make an example out of him, but he wouldn't let him. He grabbed the ball silently. "You can do anything you want as long as you don't leave the circle." Izuku raised an eyebrow, but nodded. He summoned Frankie's quirk, his skin retreating and revealing his bones. The class gasped, but watched as he loaded the ball into the Tommy gun, which had changed shape to accommodate the unusual projectile. He took aim and pulled the trigger. The ball shot off at high speeds, and Izuku left the circle. Aizawa's phone beeped and he smirked. "This is what you're aiming for." He showed his phone to the students, their mouths falling open. Izuku had shot the ball 1,371 meters. The class chattered excitedly, a pink girl even sang, "This is gonna be fun." Aizawa scowled at the teens. "Fun, you say? Are natural disasters fun? Or large-scale villain attacks? The hero world isn't fun. In fact, the person who gets last place here will be expelled. Welcome to you." Izuku stood at the starting line of the 50-meter dash, watching Bakugo get himself ready. He leaned over to Roberto and whispered to the giant. The man nodded and got behind Izuku, ready to do his part. The gunshot rang out and Bakugo blasted off of the starting line. He smirked at being in front of Izuku. That was when Izuku went flying past him. Roberto had picked the Mafia boss up and thrown him over the line at the other end of the field. The device at the finishing line reading 1.03 seconds. Bakugo finished, getting a score of 3.12 seconds, and growled in annoyance. Next up was the grip strength. Izuku placed second, beating the 6-armed boy and scoring just barely under Yaoyorozu. After that was the sit-up where he got first, having a competition with a red-haired boy named Kirishima and winning soundly. Next was the side steps. He placed second again due to his physicality, but a small purple boy beat everyone with his quirk. Izuku narrowed his eyes at the teen as he tried to get a little too close to some of the girls. He had Roberto throw him once again for the standing long jump and placed third after Bakugo, and a dual-haired boy showed that they could continue forever if they so choose. Finally, Izuku competed in the endurance run, getting second to Yaoyorozu again. He sat out of the ball throw since he had already gone. Bakugo seemed immensely angry with his score. Once all of the students were finished, Aizawa called them all to a large board. "Here are your scores." Izuku had gotten first, barely above Yaoyorozu. He looked to an invisible girl named Hagakure who had placed last. He was interested to see how this would go. "Last place is Hagakure. You get to stay." It was all a logical ruse to get you to do your best. Yaoyorozu proclaimed that it was obvious, but Izuku shook his head. "No, Aizawa, you're the hero eraser head, aren't you?" The class looked around confused as Aizawa nodded. "He wasn't bluffing. He would have expelled any of us if he didn't think you had potential." Last year he expelled his whole class. Aizawa gave him a creepy smile as the students looked shocked. Aizawa quickly schooled his expression. You are all dismissed. The heroes in training walked to the locker rooms in a stunned silence. Izuku sighed, finding it ridiculous that they were so mystified about this. It was harsh, but so was the hero industry, that was the point. Izuku had just finished tying his tie when he heard the purple-haired boy cry out in joy, "Yes. Thank you, upperclassmen." He looked over to see the small boy smirking at the wall. The other boys asked him what he was looking at, and he was all too happy to tell them, "Someone left a peephole here. It's the perfect chance." Frankie and Roberto looked ready to pounce on the pervert when Izuku snapped. He pointed to Frankie, then to the door. Frankie nodded and left to get Aizawa while Izuku handled the situation. He approached his classmate as he muttered about what he liked about each of the girls, preparing to look through the hole. Izuku grabbed him by the back of his shirt and spun the teen to look him in the eye. "Listen, Mineta, was it?" The boy nodded in confusion. "Over there is what is basically my sister and business partner as well as some friends, not to mention many young women who do not want you to look at them." The boy frowned. "You can look first if you want, man, I don't care." Izuku's eye twitched and he stood up straight. His eyes glowed a toxic green as he scowled at the boy. "I am the boss of the Midoriya family. I can make you disappear and never reappear. I suggest you leave them alone, or I may just have to make a few calls, capice?" Mineta paled, looking the mafioso in the eye as Roberto loomed over Izuku from behind. Aizawa burst through the door and stalked over to the purple pervert. "Come, Mineta, you and I are going to have a few words." The teacher paused before he left and looked at Izuku. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Midoriya." Izuku nodded and watched as Aizawa dragged the boy out of the room. He leveled his eyes at the other teens in the room. "I didn't lie when I said I could make any of you vanish. Remember that." The fuming mafia boss left the room, not seeing the jack that had emerged from the hole. Sue and her family were going out to celebrate her first day at school, even if it was a bit unorthodox. Going out to eat was not something that the Azuis did often. They weren't poor by any means, but the kids all liked their father's home-cooked meals, and most places were either insanely expensive or extremely unhealthy. On this occasion, however, Sue's father had found a place that was cheap, and their food wouldn't give them a heart attack in one bite. It was a nice place that had been open for some time, but they had never been there before. They walked into the restaurant and immediately noticed the air of fine dining it held while still being a family-style eatery. It was made from red brick, so it felt like taking a step back in time. Most of the lighting was provided by candles which flickered warmly. The tables were made of a shiny wood, and while they were close together, they didn't seem packed in. The silverware and plates were already set on each table, and there were many people there, filling the restaurant with a cheery sound of clattering dishes and pleasant conversation. A bar was sat high at the back of the restaurant, and had rows of shelves stocked with many different kinds of liquor. The only thing that seemed out of place was the manager, who was standing at a podium in front of the door. They wore a nice three-piece black suit and had neon blue slicked back hair. What really stood out, however, was the fact that this person was a skeleton. "Welcome de Conoscenza, my name Isa Ambrosi, how may I help you?" they asked, giving the family a smile. Sue's siblings were about to say something that the manager might find offensive, so Sue's mother covered their mouths. "We would like a table for 5, Jero," she said. The manager opened their mouth to respond when their glowing cyan eyes glanced behind the family. "Oh, capo. Buonasera. Il solito?" Sue turned to see exactly who she expected. "Si per favor, Ambrosi." Sue, what are you doing here?" Izuku asked, flashing her a devilish smile. He was wearing a black suit and tie that did little to hide his muscular frame. The Giuseppe brothers entered the restaurant behind him, along with a thin, beautiful woman with green hair in a sleek green dress. Sue's father looked from his daughter to Izuku and back again. "Sue, who is this Koro?" he asked with a slightly protective tone. "Kuro, Dad, this is Midoriya. He's one of my classmates." Sue's father's eyes widened. He looked back at the grinning teen again and paled a bit. "Koro, you mean like the Midoriya family?" Izuku nodded. "Yes, I'm the boss. Now why don't we have dinner together? I think it would be a lot of fun." Sue's sister escaped her mother's grasp and bounded over to Roberto. "Goro, you're big, mister." Roberto leaned over her, and her parents looked horrified. They knew that this was an authentic Italian mobster who had killed people. Their daughter was basically a grape to the giant man. Roberto stared at the small girl before raising a hand and gently patting her on the head. The youngest Azui child giggled and started to climb up the skeleton's arm. Izuku smiled and watched the two mutants interact. He then looked back to the family and gestured to Ambrosii behind them. "Guess that settles that. Come along, everyone. I promise that we don't bite." The Azuis cautiously followed Izuku and his entourage to a set of stairs. The woman went first, conversing with Ambrosii about something or other. The Azuis followed with Izuku and the Giuseppes bringing up the rear. They reached the second floor and came to a small office lounge area. It was relatively deserted, only a few skeletal workers who waved to Izuku as they passed. Finally they came to a set of double doors. They entered the room to find a large table already prepared for guests. The Azuis tentatively sat down, Sue's sister sitting next to Roberto and chattering at the man who just nodded along. Izuku pulled a chair out for the woman who thanked him. His eyes widened as if he had just thought of something. "Oh, that's right, I never introduced you. Sue and family, this is my mother, Inko Midoriya." His mother waved at them with a smile. "Nice to meet a friend of my Izuku." Izuku sat down, smiling at the family. "Enough chit-chat for now, let's order." Ambrosii went around to each of the non-skeletal people at the table and took their orders. After they left, Inko began talking to Tsu's parents about what they did for work, and Izuku turned towards the Azui children. "What do you two want to be when you grow up?" Izuku asked, his white teeth glinting in the light. "I want to be a ballerina, Goro." Tsu's sister said, making a few poses while sitting. Izuku chuckled and smiled at her. "I know a few ballets that would need a beautiful ballerina like you." He winked at her and a large blush exploded onto her face. She smiled at him bashfully and turned away, looking at him out of the corner of her eye. "I want to be a drummer or whatever," Tsu's brother said, looking unimpressed. Izuku looked up as if thinking before turning his attention back to the boy. "I don't know of any bands looking for a drummer yet, but I'll keep an eye out." The boy looked shocked for a second before his face resumed its brooding nature. "Sure, whatever." Izuku turned to Tsu to say something, but was stopped when one of the skeletons that had been working in the offices outside ran into the room. The conversation ceased and Izuku scowled at the rudeness, but motioned for the man to speak. "We know when it will happen." Izuku looked surprised before exclaiming, "When?" "When?" "Tomorrow evening. They're planning on making a move then." Izuku nodded at the skeleton's words. He smiled and stood up, his hands placed on the table. "Excellent. This calls for a celebration. Tell Ambrosii to bring in a bottle of champagne and Cidro di Mela. Then get to work on preparations." The skeleton nodded with a smile and ran out. Izuku looked to the Azuis and smiled. "Because I am in such a good mood, your food tonight is on the house. On one condition." The family glanced at each other in apprehension. "You all come back after the sports festival to have a party with us." Tsu's parents croaked in surprise. Her sister bounced in her seat with joy, and even her brother looked excited. Ambrosii rushed into the room with a bottle of champagne and a bottle of apple cider, a big smile on their face. Izuku took the bottle of champagne and popped the cork off. A large smile splitting his face. Tsu wasn't sure what was happening tomorrow evening, but she hoped that all went well for the teen. Despite his intimidating position, he was a good guy. She would hate to see him angry. The next day at school found a very happy Cerberus. "Who's a good puppy?" "You are." "You are." Mina cooed, scratching one of the dog's heads. The other two were being petted by Hagakure and Yaoyorozu in particular hugging the head and scratching in an aggressive manner that Cerberus seemed to love. "So Midoriya?" Ajura asked, trying to seem cool and laid back as normal even though she was talking to one of the most influential people in that area of Japan. "Why didn't you bring the pup to school yesterday?" Izuku smiled a little before answering. "I thought that having him around during orientation could be distracting, but in the end we just did a quirk apprehension test. He wouldn't have been super useful then either, so it turned out okay. He'll be around much more now, don't worry." Jar nodded. ignoring the heat that rose to her face at Izuku's suave smile. When Aizawa entered, the students quickly rushed to their seats. Izuku whistled sharply and Cerberus trotted away from a pouting Yaoyorozu to sit obediently next to his master. Aizawa nodded, happy with the way they behaved. Time skip. The day had passed by pretty regularly, but now was the moment that they all were waiting for. Heroics class. The teens chatted excitedly, Izuku politely responding to any question thrown his way. Finally they heard a noise. I am coming through the door like a normal person. All Might leapt through the door in a very not normal way. Izuku gave the hero a wry smile at his oddity while the rest of the class went wild at the number one hero showing up in their class. I am here to teach you zygotes how to fight. So for now we have battle training. The mighty hero stated, holding up a card with battle trial printed on it. But first you need to look the part. Change into these and meet me down at Training Ground Beta. With that All Might ran out of the room and the students rushed to get their costumes. Izuku sat at his desk calmly with his hands folded, waiting for the crowd to clear. Yaoyorozu emerged from the horde of students and walked over to Izuku's desk, handing him a case. This is yours, Midoriya. Izuku gave her a flashing smile. Why thank you, Yaoyorozu. He took the case from her hands as she blushed. He stood up and motioned for the Giuseppes and Cerberus to follow him. They made their way down to the lockers and everyone began getting changed. Izuku was the first to finish, and he exited the room silently, allowing the other guys to talk about whatever gossip they might have heard. Midoriya, aren't those your normal clothes, Karo? Tsu asked, her green jumpsuit fitting her well. Izuku smiled a bit and nodded. Well, yes, these are made specifically to withstand a lot of force as well as being fireproof, so I don't really need much of a costume per se. Besides, there will be times when I need to go to a business meeting after a fight, so I need to be prepared. Tsu nodded, his reasoning sound even if a suit and tie didn't seem the most appropriate attire for fighting crime. Soon the rest of the class arrived, their costumes making them look like full-fledged heroes. Now that you look the part, here is what we will be doing. All Might drew a note card from somewhere and began reading off of it. You will be split up into teams of 2. The teams will then be split into hero teams and villain teams. The heroes are trying to capture the fake bomb, or their enemy before the time runs out. The villains are trying to keep the heroes from touching the bomb before the time runs out. We will decide teams by drawing lots. Ida started to object, but Izuku stopped him. Hero teams will have to be made up on the fly at times, Ida, so this is to simulate that. All Might, since we only have 19 students left, I volunteer to be a team of 1 inch. The class looked shocked at this, Bakugo growling at the green-haired teen's declaration. All Might shrugged, his smile a little lopsided. Sure, young Midoriya, if that is what you want. The girls seemed to be a little upset about it. Even some of the guys appeared to be sad that they could not team up with Izuku, but the Mafia boss paid them no mind. They drew lots, finding their teams with relative ease. Alright, the first round heroes will be. All Might reached into the box and drew out a ball, young Midoriya. And the villains will be young Ida and young Bakugo. Bakugo gave Izuku a vicious smile as if to challenge the teen, but Izuku was too busy texting someone with a small scowl to notice. Ida and Bakugo entered the building and Izuku called someone. The class sweat dropped at how nonchalant Izuku seemed at this exercise. Finally, All Might gave the all clear for them to go. Izuku patted Cerberus on the back and the dog sped off into the building. Izuku then grabbed onto Roberto's back with Frankie and the giant man began scaling the outside of the building. On one of the cameras, the class could see Cerberus had found Bakugo and was trading blows with the teen. The skeletal dog grabbed Bakugo by his pant leg with 2 of its heads and threw the explosive boy into a wall. The hero in training responded with a large explosion that blew Cerberus through the wall. The dog got up and shook off some soot before returning to the fray. On another camera, Izuku and the Giuseppes had made it to the roof. Izuku gave Frankie some orders, and the man drew his gun. He fired into the roof, his bullets seeming to melt the concrete in a circular pattern. Finally, Izuku and the skeletal brothers broke through the ceiling right onto Ida. Roberto picked the teen up and held him off of the floor in both hands, and Izuku laid his hand flat against the bomb. Hero team wins. Well done everyone, please return so we can go over this, All Might announced through the loudspeakers. As the boys returned, the class muttered about how fast that was. Finally they arrived, and All Might turned to the spectators. So who do you think is MVP? It has to be Midoriya, sir, Karo, Tsu said, cutting Yaoyorozu off before she could speak. He quickly and efficiently reached the bomb. Ida did a good job trying to guard the bomb, but Karo, he didn't have the time to act. Bakugo was just plain awful. What did you say to me, you little sheet? Bakugo roared, explosions popping off of his hands aggressively. Now Bakugo, Izuku said, a menacing aura radiating off of the deceptively calm teen, let's not make any decisions that we might regret. Bakugo growled, but his explosions stopped. He glared at Izuku with all of his fury, but Izuku ignored him. Thank you for your kind words, Tsu. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make. I have an important event coming up that I need to plan for. Thank you for your time, All Might, sir. Izuku left a shocked class behind as he exited the room, the Giuseppes following him. Cerberus barked, drawing everyone's attention. He trotted over to Bakugo and dropped a piece of fabric at his feet, having apparently torn it off in their fight. He then bounded over to sit next to Tsu, his tail wagging and his tongue sticking out. She patted one of his heads, and his tail wagged harder. The students chuckled and continued with the class, not noticing a fuming Bakugo leave the room. It was late. The 3 white SUVs rumbled down the road, their payload important to their boss. If they lost it, they would likely lose their lives. The streets were mostly quiet, not many people up at this time of night, allowing the SUVs to pass unabated through stop lights and intersections. The men in the vehicles were quiet. This was an important mission, and to mess it up would mean punishment beyond their understanding. The SUVs turned onto a 2-lane street, and that's when their operation went sideways. 2 armored, black SUVs skidded to a halt in front of the caravan, blocking their path forwards. The drivers quickly shifted into reverse, but they were blocked from behind by another 2 identical SUVs. The doors of the black SUVs opened, and men in body armor, not unlike a SWAT team, leapt out. They each carried guns and pointed them at the caravan. "Come out with your hands up," a voice called out. The white SUVs opened up and men filed out. They appeared to be surrendering, but suddenly they attacked. Flashes and bangs rang out as the armored man fired into the thugs. Most went down, but a few were able to get close enough to fight. As the fighting began, the middle SUV moved away from the others. Its mission was way too important to stop for anyone or anything. Before it could ram the vehicles in front of it, something fell from the sky and crushed the hood of the car, destroying the engine and rendering the car useless. The driver looked up in horror at the large gray man, his leathery skin rippling as he got off of the ruined car. A smaller figure jumped off of his back, his green costume almost as intimidating as his partner's. Where the other man's costume appeared to simply be a gray jumpsuit with a curved horn in the center of his face, the smaller man's costume was decked out in small spikes that ran along the length of his arms, back, and legs. The spikes were capped with small silver ball that shone in the street light. The green jumpsuit was almost black in the dim lighting, its ears sticking up proudly. The mask covered his entire head except for his mouth, which was hidden behind a black mask painted with a large white smile. "I'm afraid we cannot let you pass," the smaller man said, his voice obviously distorted on purpose. "You have something that we need." From the back, 3 figures emerged. The first was a bare-chested man with an odd mask. He had brown pants, dress shoes, and a vest made of furs. He staggered around and giggled happily. Next was a man in a full-length white hoodie with a plague doctor's mask. Finally came a large man in a beige t-shirt. He wore a bird-like mask, jeans, and odd-looking gloves that went halfway up his forearms. "This is the property of Overhaul, leader of the Yakuza. Leave now and we will forgive your blunder," the man in the hoodie said, hands in his pockets. The man in the green jumpsuit looked up to his partner and asked, "What do you think, Rhino?" The large man looked down to his compatriot and shook his head firmly. The bunny man nodded, his ears flopping. "Yes, sorry. We're going to have to pass on that offer." The man with the gloves smiled and smacked his fists together. "Perfect. I'm Rappa, and I love to fight. You there, big guy? You're mine." Rappa rushed at Rhino, starting the fight. From under the white hooded man's cowl, 2 arrows shot out, racing towards their jumpsuit opponents. The bunny man leapt past Rappa and caught the 2 arrows, careful not to let them stab him. Lighting arced around his body, using the spikes to jump around to his fists. The electricity traveled to the white hooded man who convulsed, landing on his face when the green man let go of the arrows. The bare-chested man laughed and stumbled towards the bunny. "This time that we had a lil fun," he slurred, his gait suddenly leveling out. The man chuckled, pulling a flask out of his pocket and taking a swig from it. "You like that? Ma Quirk lets me make you drunk and not me." The bunny man just reached out his hand and allowed lightning to dance in his hand. A metal piece of engine was magnetized into his hand before he aimed drunkenly at the giggling man. The metal piece shot at the drunkard who caught it. With his face slumped over, unconscious, and the effects of his quirk wore off. The bunny man walked over to the back of the SUV and tore the door off. "There you are." Rappa swung his fists, his quirk allowing him to sling hundreds of punches in minutes. Rhino lifted his arms and took a few punches before throwing one of his own. Rappa met it with a punch, and the 2 skidded backwards from the force. "You're strong. I like you." Rappa laughed, leaping back at his foe. His opponent said nothing, merely dodging around a punch with surprising grace and slugging the smaller man in the face. Rappa flipped in the air and staggered when he landed on his feet. His smile only grew larger, and he rushed back to meet Rhino in combat again. The white-haired girl shook as the jumpsuits man stepped into the broken SUV. She was locked in a cage, but she knew from experience that that wouldn't stop someone from hurting her if they wanted. "It's alright," the man said, his voice comforting. "I'm not here to hurt you. Your grandpa told me to come and find you." At that the girl froze, her eyes widening. She had never known her grandpa. "I'm going to take you away from these men, then you will never be hurt again. I promise you," the man said, gently touching the metal of the cage. The girl nodded, still watching the man wearily. He grunted and the bars of the cage creaked as they were bent open. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, reaching a hand out to her slowly. She took it nervously, hoping that he wouldn't hurt her. "Turi." The man softly pulled her out of the cage, lifting her up and setting her on his hip to carry her. "It's nice to meet you, Eri. I'll tell you my name when we get to somewhere safer. What's your favorite food? We can get some on the way." Eri cautiously wrapped her arms around his neck and replied, I like apples." The man's hand gently patted her back, and she could tell that he was happy. "Great," he said softly, careful not to spook her. "Then I'll find you the most delicious apples on the planet." "I promise," Eri nodded, her fear beginning to fade away. The bunny stepped out of the SUV, shielding Eri's eyes from the fight around them. "Rhino, stop playing with your friend, it's time to go." The large man was grappling with Rappa. He nodded at the man and lifted Rappa off of the ground with ease. Rappa looked shocked as he was hurled into one of the other white SUVs. Rhino quickly moved over to where the bunny was standing. Eri shook in his arms, but the man just patted her head gently. "He's a friend, he won't hurt you. Now hold on tight." The bunny man climbed onto Rhino, locking himself into a seat on the man's back. The large man then leapt over to the nearest building and began climbing it. As they were leaving, the bunny man let out a sharp whistle. The men in body armor stopped fighting and climbed back into their SUVs, quickly peeling out of the area. They drove off as police officers began pulling up onto the scene, a few smaller heroes coming along with them to see that the confrontation had ended. As the police began arresting the Yakuza members, Rappa grabbed the hooded man and the drunkard before making his escape. Small time skip. Eri had her eyes shut tight as Rhino entered an abandoned parking garage. The bunny released a sigh of relief and unbuckled himself from the large man's back. "Great work out there, Roberto. You really gave them a show." The gray-suited man huffed his agreement as he climbed out of the jumpsuit, his skeletal appearance frightening Eri. "It's okay, Eri," Izuku said, taking off his jumpsuit to reveal some gray underclothes. "Roberto is very nice. He used to like apples too, didn't you, Roberto?" The man nodded, his face was passive as always, but his gray eyes danced with mirth. Eri blinked at the man who blinked back, causing Izuku to chuckle. Now let's get in the car, then we can go get some delicious apples. Eri's head whipped to stare at Izuku, a little bit of drool hanging out of her mouth. The teen chuckled and wiped it away with a handkerchief. He led the two to where a limo was waiting for them. Izuku knocked on the window of the limo, and it rolled down. Frankie smiled at him from inside. I takes it that all went well? Izuku nodded and ushered Eri into the car. Roberto broke into pieces, his bones hopping in after the girl. She looked scared and pressed herself against the seat behind her. Izuku smiled at the girl and gently patted her head. It's alright, Roberto just doesn't fit into cars easily. He closed the door and gently buckled Eri's seatbelt, flashing her a smile. Frankie, andiamo, he said, tapping the glass that separated the seats from the driver's section. The limo pulled out of the parking garage and hummed gently as it drove towards its destination. Izuku turned to Eri and smiled at her. Sorry about what happened, Eri. I made a promise to your grandpa to save you if you ever got into trouble. He didn't know that overhaul would. Well, I think it would be best not to talk about that for a while. Eri nodded shakily, trying not to think about what the man had done to her. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'll be your guardian from now on, if that's okay with you? Eri tilted her head. What does that mean? She asked, her voice a whisper. Izuku gave her an award-winning smile. It means that I'm going to take care of you. I won't let anyone hurt you. Is that all right? Eri nodded hesitantly. Izuku smiled brightly and grabbed his phone. He quickly dialed a number and put the phone up to his ear. He winked at Eri before speaking. Giorgio? Io ho una bambina famata che io ho bisogno di una mela caramelata, per favor. He stopped to listen to what the person on the other end was saying before tapping the glass divider again and asking Frankie, Quanto ci vediamo? 20 minuti, capo, Frankie responded. Izuku said the same thing into the phone. He hummed in agreement a few times before saying, Si assai grazie. A dopo, he hung up the phone and smiled. At Eri, once more speaking Japanese, I always do my best to keep my promises, and I promised you an apple when we got away from those bad men, didn't I? Eri nodded, doing her best not to drool just thinking about apples. Then when we get home, you're going to try Giorgio's special candy apple. It's very good. By the time they got to the Midoriya family office building, the leather seats were stained with saliva. Izuku just laughed and told the valet to send it to the cleaners. He couldn't get mad at a little girl wanting sweets, could he? Meanwhile, Overhaul was fuming. Not only did at least 30 of his men get taken into police custody, but they lost it. They lost his supply of DNA. He needed it to get rid of the pestilence that was Quirk's. He deconstructed and reconstructed one of the thugs who had managed to escape. The blood was directed at the floor so as not to allow him to break out in hives. His hand was already itchy and had a rash, but he needed to vent his anger somehow. The man's screams echoed into the night, and there was nothing left of him by morning. As his limo pulled up to the gates of the school, Izuku scowled. There was a crowd of people outside of the school, and they were obviously not students. He got out, leading out a scared Eri. Frankie helped Roberto put himself back together and watch Eri while Izuku stalked up to the crowd. Someone noticed him approaching, and a bit of the crowd broke off to rush over to him. They shouted questions at him about All Might being his teacher, but Izuku stood there unmoving. He spoke, and his voice quieted the smaller crowd around him. You are trespassing on private property. UA has not called the police yet, but I will. I suggest you leave. Around him, some of the reporters began to move away from the gates. Izuku motioned for Roberto and Frankie to follow him, the crowd rushing over to interview him before his words caused them to part around him. They recognized the barely restrained anger that he held, and the danger that he posed. Finally, Izuku and the Giuseppes made it to the gates. It was going to be a long day. Small time skip. Whatever Aizawa was expecting when he walked into class, it was certainly not to see his students being held at gunpoint by one of his other students' Quirk. The kids were all cluttered around the last row of desks, trying to see something. Yusa need to get it back. Shay needs her spase, the skeleton ordered, waving his gun at them. Aizawa normally would have tried to restrain the rampant Quirk companion, but he realized that none of his students looked all that worried. He entered the room and saw that they were hovering around Izuku and his larger skeletal companion. In the large skeleton's hands was a little girl who appeared to be overwhelmed. "Everyone," Izawa growled, getting their attention, "stop crowding the child and sit down." The teens all rushed to their seats, reasonably afraid of their teacher. The man glared at Izuku, looking from him to the girl and back. "Midoriya, what's with the kid?" Izuku sat down calmly and fixed his tie, glancing up at Izawa lazily. "She's my daughter." The class broke into a roar of noise. Izuku sat there, boredly watching his teacher as the students started throwing questions his way. Finally, he seemed to get annoyed with the constant questions. He put his 2 pinky fingers into his mouth and whistled sharply, quieting the class. "Her parents have passed on, and her grandfather asked me to take care of her if anything were to happen to him. I am now acting as her guardian. She's here today because we haven't found someone who is trustworthy enough to homeschool her, and she's scared of most people." The class still seemed shocked, but at least they seemed to realize that what they had thought had happened didn't. Izawa nodded, not super happy that the girl was here, but knowing the difficulty of young children, he was fine with her being around. "Just make sure that she doesn't cause any disruptions," the man said, stepping up to his podium. Izuku nodded, fixing his cuffs. "Roberto can take care of her for now. Please just pretend that she isn't here, it would make everyone more comfortable." Most of the class could read between the lines, turning back to the front of the room. With that, the class was underway. Small time skip. As they headed to lunch, Tsu moved to stand next to Izuku, tilting her head and putting a finger to her mouth. "Karo, what's her name?" she asked, making sure that she is giving the small girl some space. Izuku smiled at her charmingly and responded simply, "Eri." The white-haired girl peeks around Roberto's arm for a second, catching Tsu's eye. She gives the girl a small smile and Eri hides herself again. Izuku chuckles. "I just picked her up last night. That was the call that I had gotten," he explained as they reached the cafeteria. They took their seats and lunch rush brought them their food. They were making pleasant conversation, when suddenly an alarm rang out. It blared harshly, informing the students, "Level 3 security breach. Please make your way out of the building." Students all around them began sprinting for the door. Izuku grabbed the collar of a nearby upperclassman. "What's happening?" "Someone has broken onto campus," the teen yelled, wrenching himself from Izuku's grasp. Izuku stood on the table, peering over the mob of students. He saw that it was just the press and he rolled his eyes. He looked back at the table and saw that Eri was having what was certainly a panic attack. His brow furrowed in a deep scowl. He activated his quirk, allowing his body to become skeletal. He brought his hands up to his face like he had earlier, lightning arcing over his fingers. He whistled loud enough for the windows to rattle, stopping the herd of students in their tracks. "It's just the press," he roared. "Calm yourselves and exit the room." The teens all looked around sheepishly and began to evacuate more calmly. Izuku hopped down from his perch and scooped Eri into his arms. He set her on the table and began quietly calming her down. Tsu watched appreciatively. Seeing him be so gentle after having been so angry was interesting. They walked back to class after Izuku had calmed down the poor shaking girl. When she had finally calmed down, she had gone to sleep, resting her head against Izuku's shoulder. After arriving at class, Izuku handed Eri to Roberto so that the giant man could find a quiet place for Eri to finish her nap. After all of the students had returned to class, Izawa made an announcement. "You all are going to have to pick your class representatives. I don't care how you do it, just as long as it gets done." The class broke out into a shouting fest, almost everyone wanting to be the representative. Finally, they came to the decision to take a vote. Izuku wrote down Yayarosa's name, knowing that she would do well in the position. He sat there quietly, waiting for the votes to get tallied. To his mild surprise, he had received the most votes. A solid Yayarozu had gotten second with 3, so he was content with his partner. He stood in front of the class and made a small speech. "Thank you all for having so much confidence in me. I will do my best to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and with respect. Everyone is equal regardless of your gender, race, romantic preference, and quirk. I hope that you all will help me make this class one of the best to graduate from UA. So together let us go plus ultra." The class clapped cheerfully, knowing that he would do a good job. Izuku stood in front of the bus, ready for the class trip. He was already dressed in his hero costume, and he was waiting for the rest of the class to arrive. "It's good to have you back, Viola," he said, gazing at the red-headed skeleton. "You're just in time." The woman straightened her red tie and nodded somnolently. "It is just too bad that the deal didn't pan out the way we wanted." Izuku waved her off, uncaring. "Midoriya, it is good to see that you're so early," Ida said while swinging his arm up and down in an odd manner. "Ciao Ida. Buongiorno. Glad to see you're ready for the day," Izuku replied with a suave smile. He gestured to the bus. "You should put your lunch in the bus now while everyone else is still arriving." Ida nodded, but looked to Viola in confusion. "This is Viola. She is the third skeleton I raised from the dead." Ida nodded and bowed to her in the customary greeting. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Viola." Viola chuckled. "Piacere di conoscerti." "Just to call me Viola, per favor." Ida nodded and bowed once more. "Well then, it is nice to meet you, Viola." "Mi piace questo," she whispered to Izuku. The other kids started arriving soon after Ida. They milled about and talked amongst each other about how excited they were for the field trip. Tsu strode up next to Izuku and asked him, "Where's Eri?" "Karo." Izuku gave her a small smile. "She's at home with Mia Mama. I thought that bringing her on this trip might be a little too much." "She'll be okay." Tsu nodded, glad that the little girl in question was being taken care of. Once everyone had stowed their lunches and gotten on board, the bus took off. They chatted idly about anything and everything that came up, including Izuku's line of work. Izuku answered, albeit cryptically. "I deal in loans and information," he said simply, the casual smile on his face convincing most of the class that there was nothing more to his statement. Finally, the class arrived at their destination. They filed out and looked at the large dome in awe. As they entered, they heard a voice call out to them, "Welcome to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint," or USJ for short. 13. "They're my favorite hero," Uraraka said, a large smile on her face. Izuku smiled happily beside her, the Giuseppes, Viola, and Cerberus waiting patiently behind him. 13 began speaking about what they would be doing that day, but something drew Izuku's attention to the courtyard of the building. A swirl of darkness caught his eye, and he scowled. "Preparati alla battaglia?" he barked, the skeletons instantly snapping to attention and readying their quirks. Aizawa's head whipped over to the mob boss, and the green-haired boy growled out one word, "Villains." Aizawa and 13 turned to see the black vortex begin to spit out people of all shapes and sizes. The most prominent of them were a man with blue hair and hands all over him and a large black bird creature. "Where is All Might? My mini-map said that he'd be here." "Oh well, maybe if we kill a few grunts the big boss will show up," the man with the hands said, scratching at his neck a bit. Izuku's scowl deepened. 13, "Get the kids out of here," Aizawa ordered, jumping down to fight the villains. 13 tried to lead the class to the doors, but the purple mist stopped them from reaching the exit. The villain calmly told them, "Sorry, but we can't have you leaving on us. Shigaraki hasn't completed his quest, as he calls it." Roberto, Viola, siete con Aizawa. Cerberus, vaya a tener ayudo. Frankie, sei con me per defender la clase, Izuku said, his words flowing like a song. Roberto grabbed Viola by the hands and set her on his shoulders before leaping down the stairs, leaving large cracks in the concrete where he landed. Cerberus sped off past the mist, dodging and leaping around the tendrils before all three heads blew fire at the door. It began to melt when suddenly the pup fell into the mist and disappeared. Frankie and Izuku began unleashing rubber bullets into the villain as the class tried to escape. The mist exploded all around them, and Izuku's vision went black. When he could see again, he found himself submerged in water. As the bubbles from his fall cleared, he saw a shark-like villain thrashing towards him. He saw a green blur racing towards him, but the threat in front of him was more important. The villain's jaw opened, and he slammed his hand into the man's eye, cutting himself on the hard scales of the shark man's face. That was when he felt something long, thick, and slippery wrap around his waist. He was about to zap the thing, but he realized that it was just Tsu. She yanked him on board a ship before slamming Mineta onto the deck as well. Izuku stood up and brushed himself off as Tsu climbed onto the boat. Izuku looked over the side of the ship as blood dripped from his hand. Just as he had thought, villains surrounded the boat, and the shore was quite far away. He turned to see a panicked Mineta next to a calm-looking Tsu. "We're going to die here. We're going to die and I'm going to die of version," Mineta said, tears and snot dripping down his face. He turned to Tsu, but Izuku interrupted a sentence that would have likely gotten him used as bait. "No one is going to die here," Izuku said simply, loosening his tie and slipping it from his neck. Mineta looked at him, his whole body shaking. "My reinforcements will be here soon, and besides that these villains are amateurs," Izuku wrapped the red tie around his bleeding hand, tying it into a neat bow. Tsu tilted her head and gave an inquisitive croak. "Thank you for asking, Tsu," Izuku said, surprising the frog girl. "I have a tracking device, and if the signal is ever cut off as it is now, then an elite squad will be sent to my last known location within minutes. They are likely only 5 minutes away at this point. Besides that, the villains obviously do not know our quirks, or they would have sent me to somewhere where mine would be less effective, and Tsu's would hinder her, such as the flame zone. Because of this, they should be easy to handle. At least, most of them." His confident smile released quite a bit of tension in the two other students. He leaned once more over the railing of the ship and gazed down at the villains. "Ciao. Hello. I'm giving you a warning. If you don't leave this pool in the next 45 seconds, I'm going to fry you like fish." He held up a skeletal hand and allowed some of Viola's quirk to dance around his fingers, the lightning sending the villains swimming for their lives. He slid his suit jacket off his shoulders and handed it to Tsu, his white button-up sticking to his muscles and giving her a very nice image. "Take this. It's bulletproof and fire-resistant. It should keep you safe. Mineta, you have your ball, you'll be fine as long as you make a wall with them." Izuku's body turned skeletal and he held up his hands. 5. The villains scampered out of the water as fast as they could. 4. A few screamed as they realized that they would not make it. 3. One of the ones in the water began praying. 2. The villains outside of the water ran as fast as they could away from the flood zone. 1. Izuku said and proceeded to shoot lightning into the water. The villains still in the water yelled out in pain as they were shocked, and the rest continued to run, hoping to get away from the insane student. Once he was finished, Izuku turned over his shoulder and waved Tsu and Mineta over. "Come on, let's go." With that he hopped over the side. After a bit of swimming, the 3 students reached the edge of the water. An explosion sounded from the door area, and a band of well-dressed skeletons emerged with Tommy guns, much like a very sad Frankie who stood in front of them. "Rattle 'em, boys," he yelled, and the sound of their guns firing mixed with the sounds of the battle. "About time," Izuku chuckled. Mineta moved to climb out of the lake, but Izuku stopped him. They looked up and saw Roberto throwing around villains like they were twigs, Viola zapping people like she was in a Western movie, and Aizawa whipping the criminals into each other with his capture tape. The hand villain was scratching at his neck and muttering under his breath about hackers and cheaters. Finally he yelled out, "Noma, take out those stupid heroes. Start with Eraserhead." The bird villain lunged towards Aizawa, slamming him into the ground like a rag doll. Roberto whipped towards it and threw a mighty punch. The punch struck true, but the creature didn't budge. Izuku knew that a punch like that could take out buildings like a wrecking ball. That was bad. Very bad. Roberto grabbed the bird creature and threw it off of Aizawa. Viola came rushing over and began to check his vitals. "Lui vivo," Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, but the battle wasn't over yet. The Nomu appeared next to Roberto and threw a titanic punch into the man. The giant went tumbling across the courtyard, his fingers digging into the concrete to stop himself. As the Nomu and Roberto fought, Izuku and his classmates ran over to Viola. "Viola, gli si porta all'ingresso, farli assire." Viola looked like she wanted to argue, but a loud crack stopped her. They turned to see that Roberto's skull was cracked. In fact, many of his bones were broken or littered with hairline fractures. He was coming apart at the seams. Izuku shed his white top. The tattoo on his back was visible for a second before the skin retreated from his bones. He grew larger, Roberto's quirk flowing through him. "Distruggero quella cosa," he said, anger visible in his glowing green eyes. He charged at the bird thing, his enlarged fist swinging with a haymaker. The Noma didn't even flinch at the strike. It merely turned around and slugged him in the stomach. Izuku could feel one of his ribs crack, but he couldn't stop. All he was seeing was red. Nessuno fa del male alla mia famiglia. He growled. The gnome didn't respond, it merely charged at him. He ducked under its fist and threw an uppercut. The creature batted him away, his feet creating divots in the floor. The gnome appeared in front of him with its hands raised, going for the killing blow. Before it could, Izuku switched quirks. The gnome's head shook slightly as the blow was reversed. Ken's quirk flashed on Izuku's face, the green markings glowing like stoplights. The creature began raining blows down onto him. Izuku stood his ground as the gnome was slowly beat down by its own fists. That was when Izuku got a splitting headache. Oh no! Izuku saw it a split second before Ken's quirk shut off, a large black fist warping the air in front of his left eye. Izuku was launched backwards, his limbs a tangled mess. He couldn't see out of his left eye. He raised a skeletal hand to his face and found a large crack had split the bone over and below his eye. He dropped his quirk, hoping that would fix the damage, but even when his skin knit itself back on and vision returned to his eye, he could tell that something was off. It was time to resurrect something, but this time was different. Something was very wrong. Tsu looked back at Izuku, his once green eye was now stark white, and a large scar now marred his face. He hunched over as if in excruciating pain. The gnome barreled down on him, and the frog girl reached out her hand to him, a single tear rolling down her cheek. Izuku reached up a hand and caught the gnome's fist, stopping it dead in its tracks. A white light rolled from the gnome's back into Izuku, entering his own back in the same space. It happened once, twice, 3 times. After the 3rd time, the gnome's skin began to flake off and disintegrate. At first it was about the size of a golf ball, then a tennis ball, then a bowling ball. Its skin and muscles continued to disintegrate until all that was left was its skeleton. Izuku let go of its hand, his now white eye and scar glowing brilliantly as the gnome collapsed into a pile of bones. Not fair, not fair, not fair, not fair. The hand villain screamed, violently scratching at his neck. The mist villain appeared at his side. Shigaraki, it is time we leave. I do not think that staying would be a good idea. Shigaraki continued to scream and yell as he sank into the mist villain's body, his last words being, I'm going to get you, skeleton boy. Izuku watched the space where the villain had stood, and said in a resonating voice, Aspetero, Kagna. Then he collapsed to the floor next to the decayed body of the gnome, the glow fading from his face. Izuku woke with a start. He was in a hospital bed, a heart monitor beeping rhythmically beside him, slowing as his accelerated heart rate calmed. He looked around the room, not recognizing it and checking for ways to escape. Over the beeping monitor, he heard something tapping towards him. His quirk flared to the surface, Viola's quirk prepared to strike, but before he even saw who it was his quirk slipped and his head throbbed painfully. Stop. Stop. You're going to hurt yourself even more. A woman's voice called out, You've used up way too much of your quirk and the gnome did a number on you. You're lucky that you're not in a coma. Izuku peeked an eye open. His vision faded in and out for a few seconds before he could finally focus on the woman standing in front of him, though he couldn't make out much detail. Oh, and there are 2 things that we need to discuss. They're pretty important, but they can wait until you're at least able to think straight. Izuku growled a little and sat up slowly, his head still pained, but it was getting a little better. I can think just fine. Who are you? Where am I? Where are my skeletons? And what's wrong with me? The woman sighed, her outfit leading Izuku to think that she was either a hero or a villain. You sure do ask a lot of questions, Sonny. I am Recovery Girl, UA's nurse. You are at the nurse's office. Your skeletons are outside waiting for you. You're suffering from quirk exhaustion, a fracture in your skull, a concussion, and you are the 2nd person in recorded history to have stolen a quirk. At this, Izuku's eyes blew wide, ignoring the splitting pain in his skull. I'm what? His eyes slammed shut and he grabbed his head, the agony too much to ignore. Calm down there, kid. I'll explain everything here in a bit, but first we need to make sure that you're going to be alright to hear it. As Recovery Girl checked Izuku's vitals, Izuku could not stop thinking about what she had said. He stole a quirk? You stole for actually, Recovery Girl corrected. You were speaking aloud. Izuku sighed and kept his eyes closed. He could listen and lay back anyways. Per favor, tell me what you mean, Izuku asks, his brow furrowed in confusion. Recovery Girl sighed and continued fussing about him, taking readings and measurements. Well, normally someone would only have one quirk factor. It is what allows you to activate your quirk. Before coming here you had 5, one that allowed you to raise the dead as your skeleton warriors and then one for the first 4 skeletons that you raised. Now you have 9. Your classmates say that they saw some fancy light show happening between you and that creature. I'd say you stole its quirks. Izuku essayed in a breath. He slightly opened his left eye, peering at the old heroine. What does that mean for my physiology? The woman smiled and chuckled. You're a smart one. As far as I can tell, you now have minor versions of that thing's quirks. You'll likely be able to improve upon them with time and effort. Izuku hummed thoughtfully. Do you know what the quirks are? He could vaguely see Recovery Girl shake her head. Not as far as I can tell. We can run some tests when you're back at full health and determine at least the ballpark for these new quirks. My question is, how did you do it? Izuku looked at his hands. I don't know. I felt the normal feeling for a revival, but instead of reviving anything I just touched the Nomu. His head turned to look at Recovery Girl. She seemed to realize what he had. Is it possible that your quirk could act in reverse? She asked. Rather than reviving something and giving it its quirk back, you take its quirk and its life? Izuku sat there for a while, staring at the white ceiling. For the first time in a very long time, tears pooled in his eyes. Does this mean, he asked, his voice wavering with emotion, that I'm a murderer? Recovery Girl sighed and hobbled over to his side. She placed a gentle hand on the boy's arm. After all, despite his empire and his money and his business, he was just a boy. No, Sonny, you're not a murderer. Not only was it self-defense and an act of a quirk that you are unable to control, but that thing was no longer human. I looked at its bones. That thing may have once been human, but it isn't any longer. Don't feel bad about it. You put that thing out of its misery. Izuku covered his eyes with his hands, skiing in a deep breath before sitting up. His eyes were red from the tears, but his face was determined. You said we had 2 things to discuss. What was the other thing? Recovery Girl walked over to her desk slowly, grabbing something and returning to his bedside. That thing did a real number on you. I don't understand why, but it left this. She held up the thing in her hands. It was a mirror. Izuku stared at his own reflection, a large jagged scar over his left eye which was now stark white. Mio Dio, Izuku whispered under his breath, gently running his hand over the scar. Mamma mia, etc. He studied his face. Nothing else seemed the matter, but this was something unexpected. He could still see out of his left eye perfectly well, but the change was beyond his comprehension. A knock sounded from the door and Recovery Girl looked to Izuku. How are you feeling? Izuku sighed and set down the mirror. He had dealt with plenty of things. A little cosmetic change to his face wasn't that big of a deal. I'm fine. Recovery Girl nodded and hobbled over to the door. She opened it slightly. You can come in, you just have to be quiet and calm. She opened the door wider and stepped out of the way. The first one in was Frankie. He was always first. The sight of him brought a smile to Izuku's face. Capo. Grazie a Dio che stai bene. The skeletal man wrapped his arms around Izuku and held him gently but firmly. Behind Frankie came Viola and his mother, followed by Roberto, who was barely able to fit through the door. They all gathered around him, gently holding on to him. Finally they all pulled back and got a good look at his face. Oh, Izuku, Inko said, softly running a hand over his face, tracing a slender finger over the scar on his face. What happened to you? Izuku sighed and was about to start talking when another knock came from the open door. Sorry to disturb you, but I was wondering that too. There were 2 men in the doorway, a plain-looking man in a beige trench coat and hat, and a gaunt blonde man in an overly large suit. My name is Detective Tsubasa and I need to get a statement from you if you wouldn't mind. Izuku nodded and motioned them in. Well, I guess I'll start from the beginning, Izuku said, starting from when they got off the bus. This was going to take a while. Izuku sighed in disappointment as most of the class crowded his desk with questions. What happened to his eye? What happened to the Nomu? Did it get called off? How did he pick up chicks? At this, Izuku scowled at Kaminari, who asked the question. The boy smiled awkwardly at the glares he was getting and backed off a little bit. I'm really glad you're okay, Izuku. I got really worried when you were teleported off, Uraraka said, a concerned frown stretching across her face. Izuku gave her a wry smile and nodded. I'm fine, la mia amica. It would take a lot more than what those imbecili could throw at me to kill me. They just got lucky that the Nomu was stronger than Roberto. The giant skeleton blinked as attention was turned to him. That was when Aizawa made his entrance, calling for all of them to sit down. I regret to inform you that your battle isn't over yet, Aizawa said, causing the class to lean forwards in their seats. Izuku scowled deeply and began to get out of his seat. The UA Sports Festival is in 2 weeks. The class sweat dropped at that. Izuku spoke up. The board of directors truly does not care about us, do they? Only the image of the school. The class murmured in confusion before Izuku explained. They aren't pushing back or canceling the sports festival to save money and save face. They don't want to seem weak. Aizawa nodded. I advocated pushing it back, but they did not see reason. Now we must prepare. Get ready for a brutal few weeks. Time skipped to a few days later. Tsu was taking her siblings shopping at the mall. It was the weekend, but her parents were working because they wanted to take the sports festival off. It was a pretty common practice, but they needed her to run to the store and pick up their groceries for the week. Karo, please you guys, I need you to behave while mom and dad are at work, Tsu begged, her sister hanging off of the shopping cart and swinging her feet and her brother bouncing around the cart like a broken spring. It took a while, especially since she had to keep wrangling her siblings, but finally Tsu managed to get everything that her family needed for the week. She had gotten her brother and sister to help with carrying the bags by making it a competition. They turned into an alley so that they didn't have to walk for another block to get on the right street when a figure appeared at the other side of the alley. Well, what do we have here? The man said, the tone of his voice putting Tsu on edge immediately. These three thought that they could get through our turf without paying the toll. Tsu grabbed her siblings and began to back up when they crashed into someone behind them. You're right, brother, what hooligans they are, a woman said, a devilish smirk on her face. Her fingernails grew out into claws and one gently tilted Tsu's head. Oh, I'm going to have so much fun with you. Tsu lashed out with a foot, knocking the woman on her butt. The frog girl dropped the groceries and grabbed her siblings. She squatted as low as she could and leapt with all of her might. She soared over the woman and was about to land in the street when she was yanked back by a rope around her neck. She dropped her brother and sister on the sidewalk outside of the alley. Run! She croaked, the rope choking her. Her sister sprinted off down the street, screaming for help. Meanwhile, her brother stood there in shock, unsure of what to do. Tsu's hands scrabbled at the rope around her neck until the woman's claws sunk into the flesh of her forearms and pried them apart. You didn't think you could get away just like that, did you? The woman growled. Tsu lashed out with her foot again, feigning for the woman. As she expected, the rope drew her back enough that she would have missed, but she swung around and kicked the man as hard as she could, the squeak of pain that she heard signaling that she had nailed him right in the family jewels. Home run. The rope around her neck went slack and fell off her shoulders. She headbutted the woman and used her stomach as a springboard, leaping off her and landing in a crouch behind the man. She swept her leg out and knocked the man into the nearest wall. The woman lunged at her, her claws coming down like a panther. Tsu was overextended, she couldn't move back quick enough to defend herself. A blur raced in front of her, blocking the hit. I guess I now have shock absorption as well. That will come in handy. Tsu looked up to see a mop of green hair. Izuku turned his head just enough to look at her, his left eye shining a brilliant white. Your sister said that you needed help. I hope you don't mind me cutting in? Tsu shook her head, not trusting her voice. Izuku grabbed the still shocked woman by her arms and swung her up like a rag doll. He slammed her into the wall opposite where Tsu had kicked her brother, and she bounced off to land in a sprawled heap on the ground. The man's rope wrapped itself around Izuku's neck, the noose of it tightening quickly. Tsu leaped around the boy, her foot cracking the man's jaw. The woman sliced at her leg, but Izuku threw her down the alleyway into the waiting arms of Roberto. The giant hit the woman on the top of her head, knocking her out. Tsu slammed her foot down onto the man's head, knocking him out for certain. Izuku gave her a slight smile. Nice teamwork. It's a shame that our first real team-up would be in a situation like this. Izuku walked up to Tsu's sister and crouched in front of her. Buon lavoro, bambina. Good job. He tousled her hair, causing the little girl to giggle and blush. Izuku turned to Tsu's brother as the frog girl gathered their groceries, the little boy staring sadly at his feet. Hey bud. Tsu's brother looked up at him, tears welling in his eyes. I know. It's hard to react when someone you care about is in danger, but it's okay. You'll get there eventually. The boy nodded, scrubbing the tears away and looking determined. Eri came racing from around Frankie's body, crashing into Izuku. Papa, you're okay. Izuku chuckled and grabbed her under her arms. He threw her into the air and caught her. Naturalmente. It takes a lot more than a few thugs to hurt me. Besides, I was just lending a hand to one of my strongest classmates. 2 against 1 is no fair. Tsu blushed slightly at the compliment. Thank you Midoriya, I don't know dash. Izuku shook his head and cut her off. You would have been fine. I have complete confidence in your ability to handle villains. These 2 would have just roughed you up a bit more before you finally knocked them out. Tsu wasn't so sure, but it felt nice to have someone believe in her so vehemently. Now come with me. I'm not letting you walk home after this. Frankie, prendi la macchina per favor. Nel modo giusto capo? Frankie replied, jogging off to get the limo. Izuku smiled at the Azui children and led them to the car, making small talk with Tsu's brother and sister. By the time the kids got home, they were all feeling much better. Izuku promised to take care of the villains who attacked them. Before they left though, Izuku stopped Tsu. Tsu, may I have your phone number? Tsu blushed, ignoring the teasing expressions from her younger siblings. Karo, sure. Izuku handed her his phone and chuckled. I just need it so that I can get in contact with you or any of our other classmates. Though it wasn't until Uraraka suggested it that I thought of making a group chat. Karo, are you and Uraraka dating? Tsu tilted her head curiously, an unsettling feeling in her stomach. She didn't know why, but she didn't want them to be romantically involved. Izuku gave a hearty laugh and shook his head. No, not only do I view Ochako as a sister, but she is lesbian. Not all close relationships include romantic feelings. Izuku didn't seem offended, an easy smile on his face. If you were wondering whether or not I'm dating anyone, the answer is no. I haven't found the right one quite yet. Tsu nodded, the unsettling feeling leaving her. Oh no. She had a crush on him. Before she could embarrass herself any further, Tsu dragged her siblings out of the car with a few thank you-s, and they went inside, her sister pestering her about her definite crush on the mysterious green-haired boy. Kirishima, Kaminari, and Siro were joking around happily when they opened the door to the classroom. Outside it they saw a large crowd gathered, and it stopped them in their tracks. Hey guys? I don't know why you're here, but we kinda need to leave. You mind moving out of the way? Kirishima asked, rubbing the back of his head in confusion. Typical, we're just in the way of the hero students, a boy with purple hair droned, stepping in front of the rest of the students. By now the rest of Class 1A had gathered around to see what all of the commotion was about. Izuku pushed his way to the front and looked out over the sea of students. So, he said unimpressed, I'm guessing you're here to announce that you intend to take our positions here in the hero course, huh? After all, you can be moved into this class if you do well enough in the sports festival. Well, luckily for you, a boy in our class just got transferred to a different course the other day for trying to cop a feel on our female classmates, so there's a position open. A few of the ladies behind him scowled at the memory of Mineta trying to grope them. As for taking our place? Well, we'll just have to see about that. The purple-haired teen squinted at Izuku, but just turned around and walked off with his hands in his pockets. The rest of the students followed suit, but a boy from Class 1B came charging through the crowd. 1A, you're not better than us. We're going to win the sports festival. A red-headed girl sighed and smacked the silver-haired teen over the head before dragging him away. Time skipped to the sports festival. Izuku was sitting calmly in the waiting room, watching as his classmates chatted nervously about what the events could be. He had to give a speech, seeing as how he had scored the highest in the entrance exam, but he wasn't worried. That was when Todoroki approached him, eyeing his skeletons with caution. Frankie, Cerberus, and Roberto were with him as usual, but Viola and even Ken were there. Ken was dressed in a nice maroon suit with a black tie and black button-up, the suit matching his maroon eyes and dull tattoos perfectly. Ken and Frankie stole glares at each other every now and again, but that was relatively normal for the two dead men. "Midoriya," Todoroki said, his face stoically determined, "I think that without the help of your skeletons I am stronger than you, objectively speaking. That's why I'm going to beat you." The room went deadly silent as the other students stared at the two teens. Izuku chuckled and stood from his relaxed spot on a bench and looked the dual-haired boy in the eyes. "Todoroki, Illinois mio amico, you have severely overestimated yourself and underestimated not only myself, but all of our classmates." Izuku swept his hand out to gesture to the rest of the class. "You hinder yourself by not using your fire, and the rest of us here will use every ounce of our strength to win. I accept your challenge, but know that you'll have to get through the rest of UA to get to me first. Also, Cerberus is more powerful than you at the moment. Objectively speaking, as you so put it." The pup in question growled at Todoroki, flames roiling out around his mouth. Bakugo looked like he was about to explode and screech something, but the cue came for the classes to head out, and Izuku turned away. The Mafia boss led his class to the field, Present Mix introduction causing uproarious applause. The loud hero proceeded to call out the other classes, giving barely any introduction to the non-hero classes. Midnight strutted out on the stage to wild cheers, mostly from the men of the audience, but there was a healthy number of ladies and others being very appreciative of the heroine's appearance. Izuku could see that Uraraka herself was doing her best not to drool at the sight of their teacher. Now it's time for the class representative of the heroics course to give a speech, Izuku Midoriya. At the mention of Izuku's name there were murmurs from the crowd. Many recognized the name. Izuku walked up the steps with confidence, and though he wasn't in his usual suit, he looked just as well dressed as ever. He stopped in front of the mic, flashing the audience a self-assured smile that set many hearts to skipping a beat. "Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Being a hero is hard work. Many hours are put into mastering one's quirk, enhancing it, sharpening one's skills at quirkless combat, etc., etc., but the hardest thing? Showing the world that all that training was worth it. Saving people. Stopping villains. Halting natural disasters. That is where a hero shines. One must always prove that they are worthy of the title, and that is the toughest challenge of all. We students at UA are lucky. We have a global stage to demonstrate our skills. That is why we must all try as hard as we can." With this, Izuku's eyes turned to focus on the other heterochromatic boy among his classmates. "To all of the villains out there, watch out. We are coming for you. To my classmates, we must go beyond our limits. We must go plus ultra." The crowd cried out with him, shouting cheers and clapping loud enough that Present Mix commentary was drowned out. Izuku strode off of the stage and his friends cheered for him, patting him on the back and bouncing happily. He shot Todoroki a smirk and turned to face the stage once more. Midnight revealed a large wheel with events written on it. "To decide the first two events, we will use this. The first event of this year's sports festival will be..." With a flourish, she spun the wheel hard. It circled a few times before slowing to a stop on an obstacle race. "Contestants to the starting line." Izuku smiled and looked at his companions. This was going to be a piece of cake. "Ready, set, go." Present Mic called, the lights above the tunnel entrance flashing from red to green. Todoroki ran out ahead of everyone and was about to throw down some ice to freeze everyone to the floor when he was suddenly passed. It was, of course, Izuku and his family. Izuku himself was riding on Cerberus. Viola, Frankie, and Ken were sitting on top of Roberto's shoulders as the giant man galloped along on all fours. They quickly took the lead and kept it. They sped past the robots, Viola and Izuku shooting lightning out of their fingers if any of the machines got too close. When they reached the chasm, Roberto and Izuku swung from the ropes left there, carrying their friends with ease. The minefield posed a bit of a problem, but with Ken's quirk they got through it faster than would normally be possible. And the first ones across the finish line are the Midoriya family. With incredible teamwork, they decimated the obstacle course. Normally that would be boring, but the rest of the students are making this much more interesting. Present Mike announced over the audience's applause. Izuku and his companions rested a bit as they waited for their remaining classmates to arrive. Todoroki crossed the finish line second, Bakugo ending up a close third. The two boys glared at Izuku, but he ignored them in favor of talking to his skeletal associates. Finally, everyone who could cross the finish line did, and Midnight called them to attention. Now for the next event, she called, spinning the wheel, a cavalry battle. Each person will have a point value. The student who got last will have 5, the next student will have 10, and so on until first place. First place is worth 10 million points. All eyes turned towards Izuku, who calmly watched his teacher. You have 15 minutes to get into teams of 3 to 4. Good luck. The teens rushed around, finding people to be on their team. Izuku merely waited before spotting someone who he wanted to join him. He strode over confidently, a smile on his face. Ciao Bella, I think that having you on my team would be a good matchup. What do you think? Sue touched a finger to her face and thought for a moment. Karo, if you have a plan, then I'm sure you'll do well. Izuku's smile grew a bit. He motioned for Sue to follow him, leading her to where Frankie and a girl with pink hair were arguing about the girl joining Izuku's team. But I could be so useful. I have plenty of babies that would help 10 million, the girl cried, shaking her bag of goodies at the skeleton. If he wants yous to be on his team, then he will tell you. Frankie replied, waving his hands around, his fingers all touched together. Frankie, Relicity, Izuku said, what is your name, miss? The girl gave him a large smile even as Frankie rolled his eyes. May Hatsum, founder of Hatsum Industries. Izuku returned her smile, but something about it was a bit off, as if he were planning something devious. Well, glad to have you aboard, Miss Hatsum. We can talk business later, but for now I'm excited to see your potential. Izuku grinned slyly, holding out a hand to Hatsum. Hatsum shook his hand with both of hers enthusiastically. Now there you are. Izuku turned to Roberto, who was leading Uraraka over. Uraraka huffed in faux annoyance. I was going to try to set up my own team. See if I could beat you this time, but, well, Roberto has quite a way with words. The giant man snorted a bit, watching his boss intently. Perfetto! Now that we have the team set up, here's the plan. Izuku motioned for the girls to come in closer so that he could whisper in their ears. He had just finished answering their questions and making sure that everyone understood when Midnight called them all to get ready. Sue was the rider, Hatsum and Uraraka taking the back positions, and Izuku leading the charge. The skeletons stood in a loose circle around the teens, looking relaxed. And the rest of the teams are the exact same except Tokoyami takes Tsu's place with Shoji and Mineta. Go! Midnight called, swinging her whip. Almost all of the teams on the field immediately turned towards Tsu with determination in their eyes. They raced towards our heroes, but Izuku whistled sharply and all hell broke loose. Roberto ran towards Todoroki's team, his knuckles shaking the ground. Ken strode confidently towards Bakugo's group, his hands in his pockets. Frankie turned his attention to Shoji's team, peppering the large teen with paintballs. Viola spun to face Hagakure's team, a vicious smile accompanying the electricity arcing between her fingertips. And last but not least, Cerberus just ran through the crowd of students, nipping at people's heels and causing general chaos on the field. The skeletons stopped most of the other teams from attacking their boss and his friends, but 2 teams were able to get past them. One was led by a boy with blonde hair from Class 1B, and the other was the purple-haired boy from the other day. That was when they enacted the plan. Uraraka activated her quirk on everyone, and they activated one of Hatsum's inventions, rocket boots. The team flew up above the other students, hovering in the air like a giant bird. They landed softly on the other side of the field, far from the other competitors. The event went on for a while longer, Izuku and company repeating the same process whenever someone got close. Then disaster struck. One of Mineta's balls stuck on Izuku's rocket boot, destroying it and causing the team to be unable to fly properly. Todoroki took advantage of this. He threw up a wall of ice around his team and Tsu's, blocking off the rest of the teens. Ida crouched and said something to his team, but Izuku was already anticipating his next move. "Tsu, it's time. You can trust me, I won't let you down." The froggy girl blushed slightly as her mind wandered, picturing Izuku as her knight in shining armor. She snapped out of it when Izuku said, "Now." Ida surged forwards, moving faster than he ever had. Tsu quickly leaped into the air as high as she could, almost clearing the wall of ice. From her position in the sky, she watched as Izuku swiftly dismantled Todoroki's team. He tripped Ida, grabbing his arm and swinging him into his teammates. Kaminari took the brunt of the hit, falling with Ida into a pile of limbs. Yaoyorozu barely held Todoroki aloft, struggling under his weight. Izuku reached out a hand and Viola's quirk launched from his fingertips, causing the black-haired girl to crash to the ground. Todoroki barely managed to keep himself off of the floor, using Yaoyorozu as a chair. This was when Tsu saw that the sky wasn't as safe as she had thought. Bakugo was barreling towards her, explosions rolling off of his hands like jet engines. Tsu was defenseless, her only attacks would just get an explosion to the face. Izuku reached out a hand to grab Todoroki's headband when he noticed that Tsu was in danger. He jumped with all of his might, the quirks that he obtained from the Nomu, launching him into the air towards the two teens and putting out the hints of fire that lighted up Todoroki's arm. Izuku reached Tsu just before Bakugo did. He grabbed the green-haired girl's foot and pulled her to his chest, using the momentum to spin his back towards Bakugo. Bakugo let off a massive explosion, sending the two greenettes rocketing into the ground. "Are you all right?" Izuku asked, his voice slightly strained from the pain of the explosion. It didn't do much to him physically besides knock the wind out of him and hurt him though, shock absorption keeping him from getting seriously burned. Tsu groaned, "Yes, Karo, thank you for taking the hit for me." "Nessun problema, Bella," Izuku said. At that moment midnight called the end of the event, Bakugo coming to a stop a few feet away from the two. He had been ready to attack once more, but knew better than to push his luck with the event over. In first place we have Team Isu. In second place is Team Todoroki. In third place is Team Bakugo. And in fourth place we have Team Shinso. What an upset. Present Mike called. Izuku smirked as he saw the purple-haired boy, interested in his power set. Izuku helped Tsu to her feet, a small blush on the girl's face when their hands touched. Todoroki walked up to Izuku, the two heterochromatic boys staring at each other for a second. "I need to speak with you." "Urgently," Todoroki said, eyeing the other students around them, in private. Izuku sighed and nodded, "Lead the way." "I'll meet you for lunch, okay, Tsu?" "Save me a seat, per favor." He shot the frog girl a wink and strode calmly behind the stoic boy, his white eye glowing slightly in the sun. The two young men stood silently in the hallway. Finally Todoroki spoke, "You made me break a promise that I made to myself." Izuku raised an eyebrow and motioned for the other heterochromatic boy to continue. "I swore that I would never use my father's quirk, but you forced me to. That is why I'm going to beat you with just my mother's ice. To prove I don't need his fire." Izuku sighed and shook his head. "Oh, you poor bambino, you really understand nothing of quirks, do you?" Todoroki looked surprised for a second before scowling. He was going to say something, but Izuku cut him off. "Your quirk is your own. It may resemble your parents' quirks, but in the end it is something entirely unique to you. My mother has a minor telekinesis quirk. My father, well, his is unrelated as well. You are limiting yourself because you do not understand this simple fact. You are your own person, despite your parents' input. As is your quirk." Todoroki stood quietly, mulling over what Izuku had said. "Have you ever heard of quirk marriages, Midoriya?" Izuku blinked in confusion. Todoroki proceeded to explain how his father had bought his mother and forced her to have children with him, all in search of the perfect quirk. Todoroki's quirk. From there he had trained Todoroki mercilessly, preparing him to surpass all might. After the red and white-haired boy was finished speaking, they stood in silence once more. Izuku closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes they glowed angrily like twin suns. "I will help you, Todoroki," he said after a few seconds. Your SPRM donor will not get away with what he has done. In return, I need 3 things from you. Todoroki frowned. This was not what he had expected. What are they? The first is simple. Become the best hero you can be. Save lives. Stop villains. Halt natural disasters. Be someone you and your mother can be proud of. Todoroki nodded, though if this was simple he feared the other requirements. Next you must learn to use your fire. I understand your resistance to it. I understand that you see it as your father's, but you must realize by going without it you are only allowing your father to win. He is controlling your actions even if indirectly, and that is exactly what he wants. Show him that you are your own person, that he holds no more sway over you. Izuku could see the reluctance on Todoroki's face. He held out his hand to the boy, and finally, the most difficult task of them all. Be my friend. At this Todoroki looked confused. How was that difficult? And why was it necessary? My friends are family to me. And no one messes with my family. You can ask Ochako about that if you so choose. Do we have a deal, Shoto? Todoroki looked down at the hand in front of him. Izuku was correct. These were difficult things for him. Using his fire would be something he had to work on. Besides that he had never had a friend before. He gazed into Izuku's eyes and grabbed his hand firmly. We do. Izuku. The green-haired boy smiled at this, and Todoroki felt like he had just made a deal with the devil. Tsu was worried about Izuku. He and Todoroki had been gone for quite some time, and Izuku's skeleton companions weren't with him. Said, what do yous mean Maya suit Isa ugly? Yous face Isa ugly. Frankie shouted, his fingers pinched together in that odd motion that Italians always used. Would you shut your trap, you pasta-brained moron? I was just saying that the red tie makes your eyes look like sheet. Ken responded, slamming his hand down on the table angrily. Viola and Roberto didn't even seem to notice their bickering. Viola was petting Cerberus and Roberto was reading a book, a small pair of reading glasses perched on his head with the assistance of a strap around his skull. So sorry for them. Viola said with a sigh, they doe this a loda. Tsu just watched as the 2 skeletal men continued to squabble. Stop fighting, both of you, Izuku said calmly as he approached the table. He sat next to Tsu with a charismatic smile as Frankie and Ken both complained to him about one another. Izuku sighed and shook his head, cut it out boys, or I'll put you both back in the persuasion room. The skeletons gulped and quieted down. The persuasion room was part of Izuku's building design to convince people to change their ways. Ken and Frankie had been locked in there a few times, and both were loath to go back. How did your meeting with Todoroki go? Tsu croaked. Well enough, Izuku replied, his eyes gleaming dangerously. Thank you for saving me a seat, Dulce, I appreciate it. Tsu didn't know what that word meant, but judging by the sly smile that Viola had when she heard it, Tsu guessed that it was flirtatious. Time skip. Now for the final event of the sports festival. Midnight cried, striking a devious pose, the tournament. Now let's spin the wheels and see what the matchups will be. The board above her lit up with a tournament bracket and the names began spinning. Finally they slotted into place. Izuku Midoriya vs Hitoshi Shinso. Shoto Todoroki vs Hantashiro. Denki Kaminari vs Ibara Shiozaki. Yugaoma vs Mina Ishido. Tenya Ida vs Mei Hatsum. Tsu Azui vs Momo Yaoyorozu. Eijiro Kirishima vs Tetsu. Katsuki Bakugo vs Ochako Uraraka. Let's give this our all. Shinso said as he approached Izuku. He held a hand out for Izuku to shake, and Izuku took it firmly. Izuku was about to say something in return when Ajiru stopped him with his tail. The tired-looking teen simply rolled his eyes and walked away. He has some sort of mind control quirk, Ajiru explained. He used it on me in the last round. I think you have to respond to him for it to activate. I knew that already, Izuku replied calmly. I was just going to see what he would do if he had me helpless. Don't worry, Illinois Mio Amiko, I'll avenge you in the next round. Ajiru watched as Izuku walked off with his skeletons, wondering how he would manage that. In this corner we have the dark horse of this year's sports festival, The surprise from UA's general course, Hitoshi Shinsu. Present Mike called out in a dramatic voice as Shinso approached the stage. The purple-haired teen slouched further and seethed at the implication of his weakness. The general course wasn't as weak as some may think. And in the other corner we have the head of the Midoriya family, the notorious skeleton company of Mustafu, the suave necromancer himself, Izuku Midoriya. Shinso watched as the mob boss waved and smiled at the crowd. His skeletons formed a half-circle around his back, as if protecting him from an attack from behind. Shinso despised his apparent charm. He stood for everything that Shinso hated about the hero industry, so Shinso would show the world that he wasn't all that he was cracked up to be. Alright boys, I want a good clean match. You may do whatever you like to take down your opponent or force them out of the ring as long as you do not attempt or cause any serious damage. Am I understood? Midnight explained. She gave each boy a pointed look, dropping her usual stuck act to make sure the rules were clear. Shinso nodded, just ready to get this out of the way. Naturalmente, Bellissima, Izuku said, shooting the heroine a wink. In return she gave him a playful and stuck smile. She walked to her chair and snapped her whip. Begin! Before Shinso could begin speaking, Izuku let out a large sigh. Hitoshi Shinso. This world has failed you, hasn't it? What? Shinso blinked in confusion. You see, I like to research anyone who I see as fit to join my family. You seem like an excellent young man with a powerful quirk, despite what people say about you. Now what is that dash? Izuku studied the purple-haired boy closely. I know of your past. I've heard all of the rumors. I've studied all of the facts. They're simply wrong. They think of you as a villain because of your quirk, but you've never really used it on people. Not unless you're competing in something for UA, like the entrance exam, or this sports festival. You have always been mistreated, and I seek to change that. When I graduate from UA, I will start my own agency. Basically the heroics branch of my family's business. If you can prove to me that you deserve it by the end of our term here at UA, I will offer you a place in my agency. Not as a sidekick or a punching bag or a glorified secretary, but as a hero. What's the catch? Izuku shook his head, sensing the deception. Luckily for Shinso, Frankie didn't see the trap ahead. There's no Kacchan. Capo never dice shady things like Kia the dash. Shinso smirked as the skeleton fell under his control. Force your boss out of the ring. Frankie turned to Izuku, prepared to attack, but Izuku merely said, Frankie, fermati. The skeleton froze in place. Shinso was extremely confused. Get him. Now. The purple-haired boy felt his quirk strain, but still the suited skeleton did not move. Sve, the greenette said, snapping his fingers. Frankie shivered, his bones rattling from his head to his toes. His eyes blinked, something that should be impossible for a skull, and he scratched his head. What was I doing? Shinsu's jaw dropped. No one had ever broken through his mind control so easily. Izuku gave him a wry smile. Your quirk is impressive, but it needs work. Join us in the hero course and learn to be a hero. Then you will have earned your place. Capice? Shinso scowled. What if I don't want to be a part of your agency? Then I'll help you get into one that you want to be a part of. And as for your previous question, there is no catch. I simply want to help foster your growth. I see greatness in you. Izuku shrugged and smiled. Shinso would have taken control of the teen, but he was too busy holding back tears. Me despise, but I have to deal with some problems later in this tournament. Izuku frowned. Roberto, if you don't mind? Shinso blinked as the large skeleton moved around his boss. Sheet. I can't beat you, can I? Roberto stopped in front of the purple-haired teen and shook his head. He gently picked the teen up, and Shinso didn't struggle as he was softly placed out of bounds. Thank you for not crushing me, the boy said, though there wasn't much heat behind his words. The giant huffed a laugh and turned to return to his master. The crowd cheered half-heartedly at the uneventful round, and Shinso moved to leave the stadium, but he was stopped by Izuku stepping beside him. I'll put in a good word for you with Aizawa. Now why don't we go say hi to your friends? What friends? Shinso sighed. Izuku pointed towards the stands where Shinsu's class was sitting. Shinso could barely hear them over the crowd, but they were calling out words of encouragement. The boy smiled, a few tears escaping from his eyes. Yeah, let's go talk to my friends. All of the battles that I don't write about will happen the same as they do in canon, laughing face. Tsu watched as Ida finally secured a win, despite Hatsume's showboating, and knew that she needed to head down to her waiting area, but she was not excited to be facing her friend in the arena. As she got up, so did Izuku. When his skeletons moved to follow the two greenettes, Izuku shook his head. Aspite-ka. He told them simply, I won't be gone long. The humanoid skeleton sat down, but Cerberus whimpered and laid his paw on Tsu's leg. Izuku looked up at the girl and gave her a smile. Is it all right if Cerberus tags along? Karo, I don't see why not, Tsu replied, hoping her nerves and apprehension didn't bleed through. Izuku gave a small whistle, and the three-headed dog fell in step on the other side of Tsu. Together the three walked down towards her waiting room, but before they could get there, they were stopped by a fiery presence. Endeavor stated simply, completely ignoring Tsu and Cerberus to focus his attention on Izuku. You will be fighting Shudo next, correct? Izuku, uncharacteristically, did not give the hero his usual smile. That I am, he replied blankly. Cerberus's tail stopped wagging, obviously sensing something not quite right with his master. You and your minions should provide a decent fight for my masterpiece. Perhaps you will last longer than your classmate. Endeavor grumbled, though your quirk doesn't seem very strong. You need to still try at the very least. Cerberus growled at the insult, but Izuku merely snapped his fingers. The dog quieted down, though Tsu could tell he was desperately wanting to sink his teeth into the large man. I will fight Shudo at an equal level, so he will determine how much power I use. As for my quirk, I have raised a skeleton from the dead every month except for one for the last 11 years straight. Alone I may not be the strongest, but I have an undead army ready and willing to fight for me at a moment's notice. Taking down a pro hero like yourself would be as easy as snapping my fingers, much less a stubborn classmate. Endeavor's flames grew in anger at the insult, but Izuku just shook his head. You allow the words of a child to affect you? No wonder All Might is more liked than you. Come on, Tsu, we should continue on our way. The hero fumed in silence as they walked past him. Just as Tsu was beginning to move out of reach, Endeavor tried to grab her shoulder. The young woman could only guess this was in an attempt to stop Izuku so that he would continue the conversation. Before his hand could so much as touch her shoulder, Izuku grabbed his finger and twisted his entire arm, causing the man to scrunch his body in an obviously uncomfortable fashion. Lay a hand on another innocent person again, and I will take it off at the shoulder, Izuku hissed, his white eye glowing menacingly. He let go of the hero and ushered Tsu and Cerberus away before the moron could challenge Izuku's threat. Finally they made it to the waiting room. Tsu sat down in one of the chairs and Izuku collapsed into one opposite of her. El mio Dio, that man is insufferable, Izuku cursed. Why are you so hostile towards him? Karo? Tsu asked, tilting her head in confusion. Besides his abrasive nature, Karo? Izuku didn't answer for a bit, but finally responded with, It's not my story to tell. Anyways, you're nervous about the fight, aren't you? Tsu croaked in confusion. How did you know that? Izuku shrugged nonchalantly and motioned for her to continue. Karo, I'm just not sure how this will go. Yamamo is very strong, and I'm very bland. Besides that I don't like having to fight my friend, Karo. Izuku nodded sympathetically, stroking his chin in thought. Well, first of all, you are not bland, he stated. Tsu raised an eyebrow in bemusement, but Izuku continued, You are a talented, intelligent, strong, and beautiful woman on top of a list of adjectives that we don't have time to discuss at the moment. You are undoubtedly capable of taking down villains, and anyone who says otherwise is a fool. As for Yaoyorozu's strengths, you'll find she has just as many weaknesses. I'm sure you'll do swimmingly. Tsu frowned slightly. She had enough self-esteem to realize that Izuku was telling the truth, but she was still troubled. Karo, but I don't want to hurt my friends, she sighed. Then find a way not to hurt her. What Karo? Tsu asked, doing a double take. Find a way to win without hurting her. Izuku replied. Tsu thought for a few moments before a plan started forming in her mind. Karo, you're a genius, Midoriya. Izuku gave her a smile. I'd like to think so. Time skip. In the far corner we have the Lady of the Lily Pads, the Frog Princess herself. Hee. Present Mike called out to the roars of the audience. Tsu padded along, running through her plan again. And in this corner we have the human 3D printer, the creative beauty of the Yaoyorozu company. Momo Yaoyorozu. Yaoyorozu looked a bit unsettled, no doubt feeling just as uncertain about the match as Tsu had been. After Midnight reminded them of the rules, she sat back in her chair and cried out, "Begin!" Immediately Tsu leapt towards Yaoyorozu. The girl in question dodged to her left, her arms sparkling as she began to create something. Before she could, Tsu jumped at her again, disrupting her concentration. Tsu hopped in front of Yaoyorozu and struck up with her foot, doing a split kick in front of the black-haired teen. Yaoyorozu slid backwards, barely getting out of the way of the strike. The heiress quickly formed a bow staff, but Tsu quickly ducked under the attack and swiveled behind Yaoyorozu. The frog girl performed an outstanding roundhouse kick, missing the other girl's head by an inch. Yaoyorozu took this chance to try and swing her staff, but Tsu twirled out of the way, causing the blackette to stumble towards her. The greenette threw a jab at the other girl's side and Yaoyorozu moved out of the way, but not without tripping over her own feet a little. Tsu took advantage of this and gently pushed her friend. Yaoyorozu spun around, ready to fight, but Midnight stopped her. Momo Yaoyorozu is out of bounds. Tsu Azui is the winner. The crowd cheered as Yaoyorozu looked down. Sure enough, she was a few inches away from the arena lines. Tsu croaked apologetically, but Yaoyorozu just smiled and congratulated her. They walked off of the field together in a comfortable silence. When Tsu sat next to Izuku, the boy gave her a knowing smile. You were missing on purpose, Esai? Tsu's face remained stoic, but her eyes twinkled mischievously and she croaked happily. Izuku could see Todoroki's stubborn look as they entered the arena and he knew that the heterochromatic boy would not be fighting at his full power. Once both teens were ready, Izuku's skeleton standing behind him calmly, Midnight started the match. Unsurprisingly, the first move that Todoroki made was to try and freeze the group solid. The glacier that sprung from the two-colored young man was not quite as large as his last, but should still be enough to hold Izuku and his companions in place. Or at least that was what he had thought. Not even a full 10 seconds after he had frozen them, cracks began forming on the wall of ice. Then the ice began to turn a reddish-orange. Suddenly a huge gout of flames burst through the glacier, and Izuku and his skeleton stepped through unharmed, if a bit wet. Well, Theta was unpleasant, Frankie shuddered, his bony brow pushed together in annoyance. Yeah, I find being in close proximity to you disgusting as well, Ken grumbled, brushing some ice off of his suit. Frankie growled back, but the two men knew that bickering in front of the whole stadium was sure to get them punished later, so they stayed quiet. Thank you, Cerberus, Izuku said with a charming smile, patting one of the dog's heads. The pup in question barked excitedly and wagged his tail, happy for the chance to help his owner. Izuku then looked up at Todoroki. That was a good showing, Shudo, but perhaps we should show them what else you can do? Todoroki paused. He really did not want to use his father's fire, despite his deal with Izuku. Izuku could see this hesitation evidently and sighed. You still view your quirk as half of your father's and half of your mother's? Todoroki frowned, and the rest of the stadium seemed to fade away as Izuku said his next words. Shudo, quirks are hereditary, but they can only belong to those who were born with them. It can never be your father's fire, as it is yours. So show us how your fire can be used to heal, instead of hurt. Todoroki remembered the times with his mother. For all of her quirk, she was always warm whenever she held him. He remembered his sister and the hugs she was able to sneak after a particularly bad beating from his father. He remembered his brother Natsuo and the hot cocoa that he would bring for Shudo when his father had paid more attention to his ice that day. Finally there was a brief memory. Tuya and the soft warmth he always gave off as he played with Shudo before his quirk came in. Before Todoroki realized it, his left side had burst into brilliant yellow and gold flames, So much different from his father's angry red and orange fire. This was warm and calming. Hot, but not the kind to overwhelm you, the kind to heat you up on a cold winter's night. The heterochromatic boy looked over at his opponent to see a massive smile on his face. This one was much different from his normally suave grin, which looked so mature and knowing. This was a smile of childlike wonder, and for the first time Todoroki realized that Izuku was the same age as him, despite his behavior. "Thank you, Izuku," he whispered. "Shuto!" Endeavor screamed from the crowd, going on a miniature rant about finally accepting his quirk. No one really noticed, however, as the two teens took that moment to clash. Todoroki sent out a burst of flame, but Ken was there to remove its effects on the group. Meanwhile, Cerberus and Roberto charged at Todoroki. The teen managed to put up a large ice wall to slow them down, but he knew that it wouldn't hold out for long. Frankie shot some beanbag rounds at the wall to help Roberto and Cerberus, and Viola released some lightning from her fingers, attempting to hit Todoroki. The hero in training sent out more fire to intercept the lightning, rendering both plasmas inert, and shored up the ice holding back the other skeletons. It wasn't until a shadow fell over him that he realized he had forgotten about Izuku. The other teen leapt off of the ice wall and crashed into Todoroki, taking the two of them to the ground. They both recovered quickly, and Todoroki sent out some ice to try and freeze Izuku. Izuku merely swatted the small glacier out of his way. The strength boost he had gotten from stealing the Nomu's quirks definitely came in handy. He then tried to take a swipe at Todoroki, but a blast of hot air pushed him back. That was when Roberto and Cerberus burst through the ice wall. Todoroki tried to put up another, but Cerberus melted it with his fire breath. Roberto grabbed Todoroki and attempted to throw him, but the teen froze himself to the large man's hand. When the giant noticed this, the hero in training unfroze himself and sent out a wave of ice to push the skeleton away from himself. He then felt a beanbag pelt into his side aggressively, but before he could retaliate, Viola shocked him with her lightning. He tried to recover, but Izuku threw him towards the edge of the arena. He managed to make a wall of ice to keep himself from rolling out of the ring, but it was quickly melted by Cerberus. Todoroki sent out a wave of flame, but Ken once again reversed the effects of the flame. Thankfully it balanced out the ice he had just made, but the lack of fire led Izuku and Roberto to push him out of the ring. The crowd roared in approval as Midnight declared Izuku the winner. Cerberus jumped on Todoroki and began liking the teen with all three of his tongues, leaving the boy sputtering from the slobber that should have been impossible. Izuku whistled sharply, "Cerberus, heel." The dog followed his master's instructions, but continued to wag his tail happily, barking a few times to show his appreciation. Izuku chuckled and helped Todoroki to his feet. "Sorry about that." Todoroki shook his head. "It's alright, I was never able to have pets, so it was kinda nice." Together the two boys and the group of skeletons walked off of the field, cracking jokes at the expense of Frankie, who cursed at them good-naturedly. Izuku was able to make it up to the stands before the next round started. Cementos needed to fix up the arena from all of the damage that was done to it when Izuku and Todoroki fought. He took a seat next to Tsu, and together with his skeletons they watched as Shiozaki handily beat Ishido. It was a decent fight, but Shiozaki's vines were too overpowering for Ishido to withstand. It was then that Tsu stood from her chair. She let out a slightly nervous croak, glancing to the seat that Ida had been using. The blue-haired teen had left earlier to get to his prep room. "You'll do great, honey," Viola said, giving the girl a reassuring smile. The rest of the skeletons voiced their agreement to the statement, and Tsu felt a lot better. Izuku gave her a confident look. "Both you and Ida are strong, but I have no doubts that you will find a way to pull the rug out from under him." Tsu took a deep breath, and her normally stoic face shifted ever so slightly into an expression of determination. In a bold move she winked at the other greenette and replied, "Then you better keep your eyes on me, Karo." This was so unexpected that Izuku's calm demeanor slipped away and his face exploded into a deep blush. Tsu ribbited happily as she walked off, making sure to add a little extra sway to her hips. It took a minute or two for Izuku to calm down, and as Mineta and Kaminari were throwing a fit about the flirting that had just taken place. Roberto rumbled with laughter, Frankie was shaking his brother's arm in excitement, Ken was rolling his eyes good-naturedly, and Viola gave Izuku a sly smirk. Cerberus knew that people were happy but was not quite smart enough to understand why, so he simply joined in the fun by running around and chasing his tail. Once Izuku had recovered his composure enough, he shot the skeletons a glare that promised pain if they didn't shape up, so the once human mob members quickly acted as if nothing had happened. Cerberus just jumped on his master's lap and began to lick his face. The pup stopped after Izuku patted his 3 heads and sat at the teen's feet. In one corner we have UA's resident metalhead who doesn't like metal music. The speedster turned forced spokesperson, Tenya Ida. Ida did not look happy with his introduction at all, but he pointedly did not glare at the announcer's box. And from the other corner we have the ferociously froggy fighter whose fists are just as dangerous as her feet. The amphibious Tsuusui. Tsu walked out from her tunnel, her face once again in its neutral form. Midnight swiftly restated the rules for the 2 teens. "Is everything clear?" she asked. They nodded and Midnight gave them a smile. "Begin." Immediately Ida sped at Tsu, but the girl was prepared for that. She leapt over the blue-haired boy's head, throwing in a backflip for the hell of it. When she landed she dropped low, ducking under Ida's hands as he tried to grab her. She swung her foot out in an attempt to sweep his feet out from under him, but Ida dodged out of the way. The bespectacled teen lashed out with a kick and Tsu met it with her own. They both winced at the pain and realized that clashing shins was perhaps not the best way to fight. Tsu took the opportunity to jump up and plant a foot into Ida's chest, sending the boy tumbling across the arena. Ida was quick to get up, but he had gotten too close to the border of the ring for his liking. His engines roared as he charged at Tsu once again. Tsu pretended to jump up again, but once Ida's arms were raised she grabbed onto his left bicep and swung herself onto his back. Ida skidded to a stop and tried to grab at the frog girl, but he had trouble reaching her. Even if he could, Tsu's quirk allowed her to stick to solid objects and Ida would have been hard-pressed to pull her off. That was when Ida got an idea. He hopped and positioned himself to land onto his back. This would have been a great way to attack Tsu, except for the fact that she swung herself back around to Ida's chest. From there she used her legs to push the speedster towards the ground. Ida grunted in pain as all of the air was driven from his lungs. Tsu grabbed the front of his shirt and started to drag him towards the edge of the arena. Ida recovered enough to stand up, but feigned that he was still too winded to do much more than gasp for air. When they got within a foot of the line, he grabbed Tsu and tried to throw her out of the ring. Tsu panicked and grabbed Ida's wrists. She then flipped over his head and used the momentum to whip Ida up and over her own head and then face first into the ground. The crowd let out a hiss of empathy at the pain that the speedster must have felt in that moment. Tsu backed off and Ida sat up, more than a little dazed from being forced to make out with the pavement. That was when he noticed that his glasses were broken. This was a major problem as Ida was extremely nearsighted, thus he could no longer fight as everything had turned into a blur of colors. Besides that he realized that he likely had a concussion and he could feel that a few teeth were loose. He sighed, "Miss Midnight, I will have to yield. I would rather not suffer more head trauma." The stadium laughed and cheered as Tsu helped the boy to his feet. As the 2 teens walked off of the stage, the audience let Ida know that they knew he had done his best. This helped ease the boy's wounded pride at having to forfeit because of something as foolish as his glasses breaking. Small time skip. Tsu left Ida in the infirmary so that recovery girl could fix him up and get him some new glasses. Ida had let the girl know in no uncertain terms that he was not upset with her at all, and he was proud to have gone up against such a formidable opponent. She somewhat shyly sat down next to Izuku, remembering her earlier words. She blushed lightly and asked, "How did I do, Karo?" Izuku blushed as well and kept his eyes off of the very attractive girl next to him. "I couldn't tear my gaze away." "You did splendidly." The class all watched them with devious smiles, though some were more hidden than others. "I am concerned with your safety, however," Izuku added, his brow furrowing. "Karo, why's that?" Tsu questioned, her blush fading as it was replaced by worry. "In the next round you will be up against Bakugo," Izuku answered, his eyes trained on the fight going on in the middle of the arena. Tsu turned to see Bakugo decimating Kirishima. The redhead had hardened himself with his quirk and was trying to fight back, but Bakugo was pounding away at him with explosions. It was like watching someone bulldoze a house in slow motion, and finally Kirishima slid out of the ring. At the sound of Midnight calling out Bakugo's win, Kirishima unhardened and tried to talk to the blonde, but his attention was turned towards the seating area. He was glaring right at her. Welcome to the semifinals, folks. This year's sports festival has been one of our most exciting yet, and it's only going to get more interesting. In one corner we have the Holy Vine Priestess, Ibara Shiozaki. Present, Mike announced. Shiozaki entered the stadium looking a little annoyed, but kept her head held high. And in the other we have the spookiest, scariest skeleton man around, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku noticed Shiozaki glaring at him as he entered the arena with Cerberus and the gang behind him. He gave her a soft smile, but she only scowled harder. Midnight ran over the rules quickly, but Izuku could see that his opponent wasn't really paying attention. Are you both ready? Midnight asked. Yes, Shiozaki replied, clasping her hands together and flaring her vines. Certo, Izuku answered, stuffing his hands in his pockets. Begin. Midnight called. Immediately Shiozaki launched her vines at Izuku. Izuku simply whistled in return. Cerberus leapt in front of the green-haired teen and released a gout of fire. Shiozaki withdrew her attack for a moment before lashing out again. Cerberus continued to shoot fire at her, halting any progress she could have made with her vines. Meanwhile, Frankie raised his gun and popped off a few shots at the green-haired teen. Shiozaki was quick to block with a shield of vines. She tried and tried to attack the group with her vines, but Cerberus would not let her past him. You have defiled the dead for too long, Midoriya. It is unnatural. Shiozaki cried. Her words were barely audible above the cheering of the crowd, but Izuku heard her. Izuku felt the ground beneath his feet rumble and leapt out of the way as some of Shiozaki's vines burst from the concrete beneath him. If you're referring to my quirk, then I'm sorry. I can't help raising the dead any more than you can stop your nails from growing. My quirk does not listen to me, even if my skeletons do. Izuku said in return. Viola grabbed the vines and sent electricity racing along the plants. Shiozaki detached the vines from her head and grew more. This is no quirk. It is an affront to God. The girl continued, You have made a deal with the devil and now you will pay the price. More of her vines erupted at the group's feet. Izuku sighed and continued to dodge. Viola sent more shocks through the vines and Roberto grabbed a few and tried to pull Shiozaki off balance by yanking on them. Neither of these worked as the religious teen popped them off of her head and grew new ones. I thought that the Bible said not to judge others lest you be judged yourself and not to condemn others lest you be condemned as well? Izuku questioned, upset by the girl's insistence on him being some sort of evildoer because of his quirk. This seemed to give Shiozaki some pause, enough that Roberto was able to finally pull her down by the hair. She cried out in pain as she hit the ground. The group rushed over to her, but she made a dome with her vines to protect herself. I don't understand why you hate me so much, Shiozaki, but I apologize. I did not want to make you uncomfortable. These are my friends as much as they are a part of my quirk. I did not choose to bring anyone back from the dead, my quirk forces me to do so. Izuku said, tearing at the vines, I respect your choice of religion, but know that it does not give you the excuse to come after me for who I am or what happens when my quirk activates. After a struggle, Izuku and his skeleton crew finally managed to open the vines enough to see that Shiozaki had dug a hole into the ground. They moved out of the way as her tendrils exploded from beneath them. They waved frantically through the air, trying to latch onto something. Shiozaki couldn't see anything and she really couldn't feel anything on the surface. That was until her vines wrapped around something. She focused all of her attention on that and squeezed it tight. For a few seconds she felt victorious and was about to throw the thing she had captured out of the ring, then it felt like all of the breath had been squeezed from her lungs. She gasped for breath and used her remaining vines to dig herself out. When she reached the surface she could breathe again, but she knew that she was in no shape to fight any longer. She collapsed to the ground and looked up to see that she had snagged one of the skeletons in her vines. Yield, she sputtered, barely able to draw breath. The crowd gave half-hearted cheers. They thought that it was a pretty cool fight, but not much happened in the latter half. Izuku and the skeletons ignored Midnight calling out their victory in favor of helping Shiozaki onto the robot stretcher, something that she wasn't the most pleased with. Izuku and his group walked out of the arena together, discussing their plans for the next round when they found Bakugo waiting for them. "Once I kill your girlfriend, I'm coming for you," the blonde stated. He turned and walked off, but Izuku could smell the sickly scent of nitroglycerin in the air. The group continued on their way, but Roberto could see the way Izuku's hands clenched at Bakugo's words. The explosive teen would need to watch himself in the next round, or he might not want to be in the finals by the end of it. Sue wasn't paying much attention to what Present Mike was saying as she walked onto the field. She was more concerned with the way Bakugo was glaring at her. After they were both situated in the arena, Midnight refreshed them on the rules. "Are you both ready?" she asked, stirring Tsu out of her stupor. "I've been ready the entire time that you've been yapping," Bakugo growled. Midnight scowled at him and turned to Tsu. Hesitantly the girl nodded, dropping into a fighting stance. Midnight snapped her whip and shouted, "Begin!" Instantly Bakugo was flying towards her. She dodged out of the way, shocked at his speed. He whirled in midair and chased her down. She attempted to continue circling around him, but he blocked her path with a couple of explosions. The green-haired girl leapt back, twisting to face the way that she had come. She leapt again, hoping to get back towards where she had started. Bakugo once again launched an explosion and cut her off. This time, however, she didn't have the time to move out of the way and was hit full-on by the blast. Sue tumbled along the ground, coming to a stop just inside of the arena. She was about to get up, but saw Bakugo rocketing towards her. The green-haired girl rolled out of the way just in time for the blonde teen to blow up the concrete where she had been laying. Chunks of the pavement cut her skin in numerous places. The greenette quickly got on her feet. She couldn't see Bakugo through the smoke, but she readied herself. When he came flying at her, she spun and kicked him hard in the face. He flew off to the side, but swiftly regained control of his flight. He raced towards her again. Sue ducked under a swing of his arm, feeling the heat from the explosion that he let off. She fell back onto her arms before flinging herself into Bakugo's stomach. He coughed as she knocked the wind out of him. She swung herself around in a sort of breakdance spin and used this to stand up. Across from her, the blonde boy rolled his shoulders and in a deep angry breath. He roared in fury as he shot upwards. Tsu raised an eyebrow as he sailed into the sky. "Eat this, you stupid toad!" he shouted, beginning to spin, howitzer impact. Tsu tried to move out of the way, but this didn't stop Bakugo. He slammed into her and rained explosions down on her. Smoke filled the field and no one could see what was going on. Izuku, who had been on the edge of his seat, gripping the armrests so tightly that they bent the whole match, shot out of his seat. He rushed to the railing, but the skeletons held him back. The smoke slowly cleared and revealed Bakugo standing on the edge of the ring. The crowd searched for Tsu until one of the cameras finally focused on the green-haired girl. The froggy teen was laying bloody, bruised, and burned against the side wall of the arena. The audience gasped in horror. Izuku wrenched himself out of the skeleton's hold and threw himself off of the balcony. A few people in the crowd screamed, but he landed without injury. He sprinted down to Tsu's side and looked her over carefully. She had a few obviously broken bones and likely a concussion. When the medical robots arrived, he gingerly helped them to load her onto the stretcher. Meanwhile, the crowd was silent. They only spoke in hushed whispers. Bakugo squinted at the two teens, unimpressed. Once the robots took Tsu away, Izuku turned to the blonde boy. Bakugo felt his blood freeze. Never once in the decade had they known each other, had Bakugo ever seen Izuku look so furious. He began to stalk towards the arena, but Midnight stepped in his path. She whispered something to him and he looked like he was about to argue, but he relented. With one last glare, he ran after Tsu and the robots. Bakugo was about to chase after him, but Midnight grabbed him tightly by the arm. "I should penalize you for excessive force," but Midoriya demanded that he get his fight. "I bought you 10 minutes to take a breather. Don't waste it," she hissed. The explosive teen ripped his arm away from her. He studied her for a second before grunting and retreating into the tunnel that he had come from. Izuku paced outside of the infirmary impatiently. Recovery Girl had told him that she'd need a few minutes to assess the situation and heal Tsu before he could sit by her bedside. His skeletons had just arrived when she allowed him entry. He sat next to his fellow Greenette and held her hands silently. Meanwhile, Frankie and Viola were bickering about what should be done to punish the blonde-haired menace. They continued to get louder and more agitated until Ken interrupted them. "Guys, calm down, we're in the infirmary. Besides, we should ask what the boss wants to do." They turned to the green-haired boy, but he said nothing. He just continued to watch over Tsu, who was wrapped in bandages from head to toe. Finally, Roberto put a gentle hand on his shoulder. This caused Izuku to look up at the TV. It was time for the match. Izuku kissed the wounded girl's hand and stood up. "You all will stay here and watch over her until I get back," he commanded, walking towards the door. Frankie moved to stop him, but Capo. "No!" Izuku barked. The skeletons froze. "You will stay here and you will watch over her. There will be no argument. Do I make myself clear, Francesco?" The group stood silently. Izuku never called Frankie Francesco. Never. "Yes, sir," the man murmured. Izuku stalked out of the room, closing the door hard behind him. "Welcome to the final round, everyone," Present Mike announced, hoping to get the wary audience back in high spirits. "First we have the bombastic warhead, the nuclear barbarian, Katsuki Bakugo." Bakugo strode out to booze, but they didn't seem to faze him. He stared straight at Izuku. And his opponent, the Skeleton King, the Lord of the Undead, Izuku Midoriya. This garnered a loud round of applause, but like his foe, Izuku didn't pay any attention to them. Midnight repeated the rules, but everyone knew that it was redundant. This was an all-out grudge match and they were excited. "Where are your little shitstain friends, Deku?" Bakugo growled. Izuku stripped his shirt off, revealing his well-toned figure. "I don't need them to deal with a unverm like you." Bakugo didn't understand what that meant, but even he knew well enough that it was an insult. They both ignored as Midnight called to begin. They simply began to circle each other slowly. "You know, Bakugo, you've always been desperate for me to notice you. Ever since I got my quirk, you've tried over and over to prove you're better than me. You gathered lackeys to combat my family. You picked on those that I helped. You did everything you could to try and one-up me. Well, now you've gone too far. Now you'll get what you want. Congratulations, Katsuki Bakugo, you now have my undivided attention." Izuku spat. Bakugo roared and charged at the shirtless teen. Izuku rushed to meet him. When they met, Bakugo began to throw punches. Explosion after explosion tore through the air where Izuku was standing. The crowd went silent again as he continued to release his barrage for a minute or two. Finally he stepped back, panting slightly. Izuku waved his hand and the smoke swept away from him. He was completely unaffected. "You think that weak murder is enough? Put in more effort, Kacchan," Izuku said, chuckling evilly. "I won't even need to use my family's quirks against you." Bakugo bellowed in outrage. He swung a massive haymaker, an explosion waiting in his palm. Instead of letting him connect like he had, Izuku pushed the attack out of the way with ease. He then used a palm strike to send Bakugo skidding across the floor. Bakugo is in a breath and Izuku slammed his heel into the blonde's foot. The explosive teen howled in pain, but Izuku wasn't finished. He uppercut the other boy before wrapping an arm around his neck and flipping him over onto his stomach. Bakugo wheezed as his breath was knocked out for the third time that day. Izuku grabbed Bakugo by the foot and lifted him into the air like a bag of groceries. He whipped him into the ground again, this time on his back, before throwing him into the air. The blonde used a few explosions to try and put some distance between the two of them, but Izuku grabbed his wrist and yanked him face first into the greenette's knee. "Where do you think you're going? Aren't I giving you what you've always wanted? A real fight?" Izuku asked sarcastically. "If you wanted some distance you should have just asked," he said, flinging the battered boy across the arena. Bakugo snarled as he got back up. He was bleeding from what was likely a broken nose and a bunch of cuts and bruises littered his body. Meanwhile, Izuku seemed to be in peak health. Bakugo ran at the green-haired teen and Izuku shook his head. I thought you wanted some space. The mob boss mocked, knocking away the attacks that Bakugo swung at him. Izuku sidestepped the blonde after a particularly wide swing and kicked at the boy's shin. Bakugo cried out as the attack broke a bone. He would have fallen to his knees if not for the fact that Izuku grabbed him in a chokehold. If you ever so much as look at Tsu the wrong way again, I will put you where no one will ever find you, capice? Midoriya, back off. Midnight called, moving to assess the situation. She could clearly see that Bakugo's leg was broken and was about to call off the match. Izuku moved away, hands raised, but Bakugo used that opportunity to release an explosion into the teen's chest. Did I go out of bounds or say that I yield? Bakugo snapped. Midnight froze and didn't answer. Then the match ain't over yet, the blonde hollered, using his good leg to whip an explosion at Izuku. The greenette grabbed his wrist, snapped his forearm, and headbutt the explosive teen hard enough to knock him out. Bakugo went limp, but Izuku kept him from hitting the ground too hard. A knockout counts though. He muttered, his anger spent. Present Mike called out that Izuku had won, but the mob boss was already rushing back to the infirmary. When he got there, he noticed that Tsu was awake and the room was silent. He stood quietly in the doorway until the medical robots carried the unconscious form of Bakugo past him. You went overboard, Tsu croaked. She did so in a tone that was less chastising and more matter-of-fact, but Izuku still felt like he had been slapped across the face. I did, he admitted, staring at the ground in shame. You did so because I was hurt. The frog girl stated. It was not a question, but Izuku nodded anyway. I'm sorry, she said after a moment of silence. Izuku looked up in confusion. What are you apologizing for? I'm the one who took things too far. If I weren't so weak then this wouldn't dash, Tsu began. You are not weak. Izuku replied. If I hadn't gotten hurt dash. It was not your fault. I dash. You are not responsible for I or Bakugo's actions. You have nothing to apologize for. Izuku stated. I went too far and I am sorry. Please do not apologize for something that you did not do. You are too strong for that. The teens blushed, an unusual sign of bashfulness from both of them. Frankie, Izuku said, turning towards the skeletons, everyone else. I'm sorry for being so abrupt with you. I lost my cool and took it out on you and that is unacceptable. I am truly sorry. The skeletons looked at each other before smiling. Water under the bridge, capo. Frankie replied, we understand perfectly. The skeletons rose from their seats and pushed Izuku into the chair nearest Tsu. Now you two enjoy some time alone together before the awards ceremony. You've earned it. With a wink, Frankie and the group left the room, the two teens now blushing even harder. Izuku squinted at the harsh light as the podium rose into the stadium. He, Bakugo, Tsu, and Shiozaki were perched on their respective places on the podium. Tsu and Shiozaki were on either side with Bakugo and Izuku in the middle. Each was raised up a little higher than the others to denote their place in the tournament. Izuku felt a tad bit uncomfortable on the highest platform, but he knew that he had earned it. It had taken some convincing to get Bakugo to set foot on the podium. Not only was he less mobile thanks to the damage that Izuku did to him in their fight, but he had initially refused to stand on the second place area. Midnight had all but threatened him to get on, and it was only the reminder that someone truly strong would accept defeat sportingly that was able to get him to stand in his spot. When they finally reached the correct height, Izuku's eyes were able to adjust enough to see around him. The crowd was roaring with cheers and confetti was flitting through the air. Midnight sauntered out to the admiration of the audience and she basked in it for a few seconds before saying anything. Give a round of applause for all of our contestants, including our victors. The crowd clapped and hollered for the teens. Izuku put on his best smile and waved to the crowd, causing them to cheer more. Beside him Bakugo rolled his eyes so hard Izuku was worried that they'd tumble back into his skull. Now to hand out the medals dash, Midnight called out, flourishing her hand upwards. We have all Mig dash. I am here. All Might shouted, crashing to the field right in the middle of Midnight's introduction. He quickly realized his mistake and apologized to the woman sheepishly. She waved him off good-naturedly, clearly stifling laughter. First All Might walked towards Shiozaki. Wonderful effort, young Shiozaki. Your feelings towards your opponent were strong and a bit misguided, but you gave it your all and put on an excellent show. The man proclaimed, slipping a third-place medal around her neck and pulling her into a hug. When she pulled away, she was clearly thinking about her actions, and Izuku hoped, perhaps a little selfishly, that she would realize he wasn't so bad and they could at least be amicable. Then All Might moved to Tsu, crossing in front of Izuku and Bakugo as he did so. He placed an identical medal around the frog girl's neck and spoke to her as well. Young Sui, you did stupendously out there. Your match with young Ida was a sight to behold. Perhaps next year we'll see you higher on the podium. All Might laughed. Tsu gave him a big smile and accepted his hug happily. Next the giant stood in front of Bakugo. The blonde turned his head away and glared at the man out of the corner of his eye. Now young Bakugo, you must be able to lose with as much dignity as when you win. The hero chided. As he tried to put the silver medal around Bakugo's shoulders, the teen grabbed it and tried to pull it out of his hands. They wrestled for it a bit as All Might continued to speak through gritted teeth. You were a worthy opponent against your peers, but you lost in the final round, so you have won the title of second. Finally All Might relented and let go, causing the explosive teen to stumble back a bit. Place. The crowd laughed as All Might rubbed his face in annoyance. Last and certainly not least, the massive hero said, turning towards Izuku, young Midoriya. You took first place in every event, a rare feat indeed. Through teamwork with your friends and skeletons, as well as your own strength, you managed to blow the competition out of the water. Congratulations, young man, you did amazing. With that, All Might hung the gold medal around Izuku's neck and gave the teen a hug. Izuku kept his composure, but hugging the hero he had always looked up to was a dream come true, not to mention having him crown Izuku the winner of the sports festival. All Might pulled away and looked out to the crowd. Now everyone, say it with me dash. While the crowd cheered, plus ultra. All Might cried out, thank you for the hard work. The audience laughed, under the assumption that this was done on purpose. The hero wouldn't correct that notion. Small time skip. Izuku and the rest of the class were exiting the locker rooms. Ashido had brought up the idea of going as a class to karaoke, and just about everyone had said that they were down. Even Koda and Todoroki were going, the dual-haired teen holding up his father's credit card and offering to pay for all of them. Izuku and Tsu were walking side by side when the mob boss's phone began to ring. He pulled it out of his pocket and held it to his ear. See? His brow furrowed more and more as the voice on the other end of the line continued to talk. See? Un minuto. Ciao. Izuku turned towards Tsu with a sigh. Unfortunately, some urgent business came up and I'm needed back at headquarters. Then he spoke louder for everyone to hear. Hey everyone, I can't make it. I have some important things to get done, but how about everyone comes to my restaurant tomorrow? We can watch the second years compete and you can eat as much as you'd like, it's on the house. The class cheered and heartily agreed. Izuku waved to Tsu as he ran to get in the back of his limo. Izuku scowled at his phone. He really didn't want to go through with this meeting. He quickly pulled up his mother's number and called her. Ciao mama. Is Eri with you? Good, please keep her busy for a while. I have some clients to deal with and I'd rather them not see her. Things could get messy if they do. Thank you. Love you too. Bye. The ride took only a few minutes and soon Izuku and the skeletons were quickly walking to the meeting room. Izuku had changed in the car and had donned his normal black business suit, though this time he wore a pair of black gloves as well as a deep green tie. He opened the door with just enough force to make a statement, but not enough to seem overly emotional. He gave his best smile as he entered. Welcome members of the Shy Hisaki. I hope you have not been waiting long. I was a bit preoccupied with the sports festival, but I rushed over as soon as I heard that you were waiting. He said, his voice smooth like syrup. From his seat, Overhaul's eyes narrowed in a glare at the teen, his bodyguards looming behind him. Izuku sat in the chair across from the masked man and folded his hands. Let's get down to business. Silence filled the room like a weighted blanket. Izuku had a good feeling that he knew why the Shy Hisaki was visiting him, But he wasn't going to show his hand. He still had a lot of prep work first. For now he waited until Overhaul spoke. An old method of interrogation was to sit in silence until the other person began to speak. Izuku loved this method. Finally Overhaul relented. "We need your help," he admitted, clearly upset with the fact that he had to say it. Izuku knew that if this were any other meeting, Frankie would be laughing his head off at the fact that the shy Hisaki needed their help, but he understood the gravity of the situation and kept quiet. "I'm sure that you know we were attacked by a group of vigilantes. They took something from me that I need," Overhaul said, clearly annoyed. "I did indeed hear that," Izuku replied. He nodded to Viola and she ducked out of the room. "How may we help you? Surely you do not want our help taking them down." Overhaul shook his head. "No, we can handle that on our own." He hesitated a bit, but continued anyway. "We need your help in finding the vigilantes. We've been looking all over, but they seem to have vanished." Izuku stroked his chin as Viola entered the room with the bottles that Izuku had sent her to get. One was a bottle of wine and the other was sparkling apple cider. "Would you like a drink? I find that it helps ease conversation," Izuku offered. Overhaul declined, but Izuku allowed Viola to pour him a glass of cider and a glass of wine for Overhaul. "Well, if you change your mind, you're welcome to it. Anyway, I can help you find this group, but I need something first." One of Overhaul's eyebrows rose, the question left unsaid. "I need to know what it is that you want back. After all, it is possible that we find it being sold on the market. If so, I can simply get it back for you and you can decide whether or not you want to keep searching for the vigilantes." They sat in silence again as Overhaul seethed. Izuku knew that he was searching for Eri, but he had to put on a show. It would be too suspicious if he accepted the offer outright. After a minute or so Overhaul finally answered. "They took my daughter." It was Izuku's turn to raise a brow. He hadn't expected that explanation. "She is very valuable to me and I want her back," the villain growled. Izuku could feel that the conversation was going downhill fast. Now was the perfect time to strike. "I see. Well, I have good news and bad news." Immediately he had Overhaul's undivided attention. "The good news is that I know who these vigilantes are. In fact, they've been causing some trouble for me and my family for a while now. The bad news is that they left Japan. We believe that they are part of the Russian mob. It seems that the Russians are trying to get a foot in the door here in Japan to set up shop. They took your daughter for leverage and they were likely going to pin it on us so that we would fight each other. It is a very good thing that you came to us when you did. An all-out war between us would bring us nothing but pain and suffering." Overhaul was clearly captured by the idea that they had a common enemy. He took the bait hook, line, and sinker. Izuku kept going, spinning the lie deeper. "We are already in the process of digging around for them. I think that this is the perfect opportunity for us to finally bury the hatchet." Overhaul leaned forward, interested in the idea. "We've fought for too long, the shy Hisaki and my family. Now we can find some common ground and perhaps a partnership." "How do you propose that?" Overhaul asked. He was becoming more entangled with the idea and Izuku was reveling in the deception. "We will supply you with information. Buyers for your drags, dealers in case you need more, info on when the heroes might show up to raid one of your storehouses. In turn you provide us with a small percentage of the profits, opportunities to build for you, and connections that you might have that we want. We would be friends rather than enemies." Izuku was fighting the smirk as it tried to work its way onto his face. "Not only would this boost both of our businesses, it would keep the Russians from encroaching onto our territory." Overhaul looked ready to agree, but then he stopped himself. "You're in a hero school. Why should we trust you?" Izuku nodded slowly, taking a sip from his glass. "I am. It's an easy cover. After all, why would my family be doing something shady? I'm a hero. It also gives me all of the confidential information that I could ever want. I can work my way deeper and deeper into the system until I am so deeply lodged that the hero organizations depend on me. And there you and the shy Hisaki are. Not only would you have complete reign of the streets, you wouldn't be harassed by heroes, cops, or villains. The perfect setup, just like the cops and the mob in America during the pre-Quirk years. Imagine it." He had Overhaul right where he wanted. And if something ever happens, you can always sever ties with us and we're back to enemies just like normal. There are no downsides here for either of us. I agree, Overhaul said. He looked a little surprised at his own words, but Izuku could tell that he was smiling under his mask. Izuku Midoriya, you have yourself a deal. Izuku clapped his hands and stood. Excellent. I'll have my people get in touch with you at a later date to iron out the specifics. I'm glad to call you a partner, Overhaul. Izuku moved his hand out, and despite his obvious distaste for touching people, Overhaul shook it. Allow Viola to guide you out. I'm afraid I have some vigilantes to look for. As Viola led the shy Hisaki out, Izuku turned to Roberto and Frankie. Listen boys. I need some time to myself. Have Amelia search the building for bugs or anything else suspicious. He ordered. The brothers nodded and left. Time skip. It was about an hour later when Roberto lumbered his way down to the gym. This was the place that Izuku was most likely spending his time. When the nearest wall exploded due to a sandbag being thrown through it, Roberto knew he was right. He looked through the hole to find Izuku breathing heavily. He was clearly extremely agitated. Talking to Overhaul after hearing about what he did to Eri had not been easy. He had barely been able to get through the conversation without tearing the man's head from his shoulders. Roberto decided to try a different approach than normal. The greenette sat down on one of the benches and pulled out his phone. He had been too busy to check it for most of the evening, but he saw a message from earlier. It was from Tsu. Everyone was asking what time we should meet at your restaurant for the party, if the offer is still on the table. It had been sent about a half hour ago, so Izuku hoped that they were all still together. I was thinking about 10, that way everyone can get settled and we can watch the ads before the festival starts. Izuku replied, wiping sweat from his brow. Tsu responded quickly afterwards to let him know that everyone was excited and willing to come, or at least everyone who had gone with them to karaoke. Izuku smiled at his phone and a small voice called out to him from the door. Papa! Izuku looked up to see Eri peeking inside of the gym. Is everything okay? She asked, slowly entering the room. Naturalmente. Izuku responded, beckoning her over to him. She sprinted at him and tackled him in a hug. I just got a little worked up is all. Nothing to worry about. Eri crinkled her nose. Papa, you're all sweaty and smelly. Izuku gasped in pretend shock. Me? Smelly? Sweaty? Never. He tickled her and she squealed with laughter. He picked her up and threw her into the air, catching her easily. You shouldn't make fun of Papa like that. He growled playfully, spinning her around in a circle. The white-haired girl roared with laughter. I'm sorry Papa, but it's true. No. Izuku cried, setting her down. It can't be. Oh, the pain. He groaned. He fell over and stuck his tongue out, pretending to die. You killed Papa. Eri jumped onto his stomach and giggled. No. You're still alive, Papa. She squished his face in her hands and made silly faces at him. Izuku sat up quickly and threw her onto his shoulder. Guess I'll just have to take my sack of potatoes up to the kitchen and have her made into French fries. Eri laughed at the joke and protested, wanting apple slices. Apple slices? I guess we can get some apple slices. Don't tell Nana though, she'll get mad at us for spoiling dinner. The two headed up to the kitchen and made shushing sounds at each other the whole way, hiding from any skeletons that they came across. Of course all of them played along, happy to see the boss and Eri in such high spirits. The next day, Izuku got to Kanashenza a half hour before the rest of the class was set to arrive. He made sure that everything was spruced up in the private room and that they had set up the TV correctly. Once he was sure that everything was perfect, he went and made sure that the kitchen was prepared to serve all of the students. He had just finished walking through the spotless kitchen when Ambrosii let him know that the first of his classmates had arrived. The greenette chuckled to himself when he found Ida, Todoroki, and Tsu waiting for him at the front. Buongiorno everyone. You got here right on time. Let's head upstairs and wait for everyone else. The 4 students quickly turned into 7, which quickly turned into everyone except for Bakugo chattering away while the pre-festival ads played. After everyone had arrived, Izuku stood in front of the TV and gently tapped his knife against a glass. The noise got everyone's attention and they fell silent. Attention everyone. Thank you all for coming out today. I want to congratulate everyone on their performance yesterday. I feel that everyone was truly able to show off why they are in the hero course. I'm sure we can all expect quite a few internship offers. Izuku said with a smile. Now let's all enjoy our seniors festival. Cheers everyone. The students raised their glasses and repeated the cheer and drank. The day went well. The festival was fun and exciting to watch. The quirks that were put on show amazed everyone with how well they were implemented. The teens were confident that they could put up a good fight against the second years, but it was clear how well trained their seniors were. After the festival was finished, everyone was reluctant to leave. It had been so much fun that they wanted to repeat the day for the third years, though no one wanted to ask Izuku about it. Finally, little Eri spoke up. Papa? She asked, tugging on Izuku's shirt. He looked down with a grin and nodded for her to continue. Can the nice people come again tomorrow? I want to do this again. Everyone's hearts melted at the sweetness of the white-haired child. Of course, Principessa, I was just about to invite everyone to come back tomorrow for the next part of the festival. That is, if they want to. Izuku looked up at them. The room erupted into agreement, and Eri gave them a wide smile so precious that even Todoroki could feel his icy heart melting. Everyone said their goodbyes and left for the night. Well, all except for one. May I help you, Aoyama? Izuku asked. The blonde boy sat in a seat close to the door and was clearly upset about something. Eri, please go with Nana for now. I have to talk to Aoyama in private. Okay, Papa. Eri replied with a yawn. Inko scooped the girl into her arms and swept out of the room, patting Aoyama on the shoulder as she passed to show her support of him. Izuku leaned forwards and folded his hands. What did you need to speak to me about, Aoyama? The blonde boy fiddled with his fingers, his usual pompous self gone. You know how to protect someone, yes? If they were to become threatened by someone very powerful? The teen asked. His nervousness could be felt from across the table. I do. I have many informants that I've had to hide and protect because of how dangerous the people around them are. Izuku said. His white eye shone briefly in the light. Do you have something that you would like to tell me? Aoyama began rocking back and forth while clutching his stomach. His hands covered right where his navel laser sprung from. Have you heard of a villain by the name of All for One? Izuku's eyes widened. Yes. I know of him. Legend has it that he still lives, even now. What has happened, Aoyama? I was quirkless when I was born. Aoyama revealed, a fact that shook Izuku to his very core. He knew that most children did not have their quirk when they were born, but this was different. Aoyama wasn't saying that he did not have his quirk when he was born. He was saying that he was born quirkless. His quirk was not his own. He gave you your quirk. Izuku realized. And now he is using you to get information on the hero course. Aoyama nodded. But I don't want to do it anymore. Everyone is so kind and brave. I don't want to help him anymore. I want to be a hero, not a villain informant. What do I do, Midoriya? The teen began to cry silently, his tears pooling on the table in front of him. Izuku sighed in a deep breath. This was a difficult situation. Izuku knew what it was like when an informant turned on you. The end results were never pretty. That was when he had an idea. Aoyama, I know how to help you, but you must listen to and do whatever I say. Do you understand? I'll do whatever you ask of me, Midoriya. Just please help me. Aoyama begged. Izuku nodded. This is what we will do. As Izuku explained his plan, he could tell that Aoyama was against it, but slowly the teen began to understand the brilliance of the plan. Is everything clear, Aoyama? Izuku asked. We will, how you say, play the long game. Aoyama answered. I do not like this, but I know that it is safer than simply cutting all ties. What will I tell my parents? Nothing, Izuku replied. The more people that know, the more likely it is that someone spills the beans. We will tell the principal because I know that he can keep information like this a secret. We will tell him when classes start back up again. For now, pretend that nothing has happened. We never had this conversation. I do not know anything about you other than what the rest of the class is aware of. The only all-for-one that exists is the one from the fairy tales. Aoyama nodded. Now go home and rest. Come back tomorrow and be your normal self. We will get through this together. Thank you so much, Midoriya. If you ever need anything, please do not hesitate to ask. Aoyama nearly sobbed. A watery smile stretched across his face. Izuku stood from his chair and clapped a hand on Aoyama's shoulder. Don't mention it, Amiko. I will make sure to let you know if you can ever help me, but for now I just want you to be as safe as possible. Make sure you sleep well. I'll see you tomorrow. Izuku led Aoyama out the door and waved goodbye. As he closed the door to the restaurant, he pulled out his phone. He had some calls to make. The next day was much less eventful than the previous. No confessions of being secret spies for an age-old supervillain. Everyone had a good time, and it was nice to watch their seniors compete. The only bad news was that Ida's brother, Ingenium, had been grievously injured by the hero killer, Stain. UA gave them a day to rest and relax before school started back up again. They were thankful for this because their return was anything but relaxing. For the next 2 weeks, you will be interning at a pro-heroes agency to learn the ropes. Aizawa explained, you have received offers from various heroes that watched you during the sports festival and figured that you would make good additions to their teams. The pro pressed a button and on the screen behind him a bar graph appeared with their names on it. He pressed a second button and the bars of the graph grew to include their internship offers. Most had anywhere from 5 to 10, but 3 of the bars continued to grow larger, drowning out the rest. Bakugo got a few hundred offers. Todoroki received a little over 2,000 offers, and finally Izuku was revealed to have received almost 2,500 offers. Now you will all be able to pick from these offers. Aizawa continued. If you find that you are without offers or that the offers are unsatisfactory, UA has several hero agencies that are willing to take any of our students. I believe you will all find at least 1 or 2 that are up to snuff in your offers, but this is an option if you are unhappy with any of them. With that, the scruffy hero passed around stacks of papers detailing each of their possible internship opportunities. Izuku chuckled a bit when he saw the monstrous size of his pile. He had a few ideas already, but it was Ida who made his ultimate decision. Ida tore through his mound of offers before grabbing one and filling it out quickly. Izuku knew there was something off about the way that he had chosen his internship, so he nodded to Frankie. The skeleton returned the nod and walked over to the podium under the guise of going to talk to Kirishima. While he was talking with the teen, he glanced over and saw that Ida had picked to intern with the hero manual. Manual works in Hosu. Hosu was where Ingenium was attacked and wounded. Izuku said, beginning to thumb through his internship opportunities at a fast rate. Why would Ida want to go there? Wouldn't he be afraid of suffering the same fate as his brother? Frankie asked, keeping an eye on the bespectacled boy. Izuku hummed. He would if he wasn't planning on getting revenge. As Frankie and Roberto stared in confusion, Izuku filled out his information and signed on one of the offers. Take the rest home and file them away for later. These connections could be useful. Roberto scooped them up and Izuku waltzed to the front of the room to turn in his forms. Where are you interning, Midoriya? Karo? Tsu asked. A few of their classmates leaned in to listen as well. Izuku spoke loudly, making sure that Ida could hear him. Oh, I decided to go with the hero manual. I've got some business and friends in Hosu and I felt that it would be best to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Ida's head whipped to look at Izuku in bewilderment. Izuku pretended not to notice as he continued to talk to Tsu and the others. As the class went to lunch, Ida stopped Izuku. Midoriya, we need to talk. Now. Frankie was about to say something, likely to treat Izuku with more respect, but the teen in question cut him off. Sure, Ida. What would you like? Why did you pick manual? The blue-haired boy asked with a scowl. Izuku shrugged. I could have sworn you heard me, but I have business in Hosu and a friend in need. I figured that interning there would give me an opportunity to handle that. We both know that you're lying. Izuku lifted his chin and gave Ida a glare. And we both know why you're interning with manual. I wasn't lying, it's simply that the friend in need is you and the business that I need to deal with is you getting yourself killed. It was clear that Ida was fuming. I'm not letting you get yourself killed. You do realize that is what will happen if you confront Stain, right? He's a serial hero murderer. If those heroes couldn't deal with him, what makes you, a child who has barely begun his hero training, think you can take him down? What you are doing is foolish. That's why I'm going to keep an eye on you. Ida growled. Why? Why are you stopping me from taking my revenge? Izuku rolled his eyes. You're my friend Ida. I need no excuse to help my friend. If you wanted to help me, you'd stay out of my way. Ida hissed, looming over Izuku. The Giuseppe brothers moved to intimidate the teen, but Izuku gave them the signal to back off. Fine. Izuku turned away from Ida and started to walk towards the cafeteria. I'll let you get your butt kicked and then I'll help you. Maybe that will teach you a lesson or two. The rest of the day went off without any more confrontations, but Izuku could feel Ida's eyes on him. The next few days passed in a blur. The only event that broke up the relative monotony was when Aizawa called in midnight to help them choose their hero names. My hero name is Froppy, Caro. I've had it in mind since I was young. Sue announced, holding up her whiteboard. The class murmured in approval. Slowly more and more of the students got up and displayed their hero names. Only a few were told to change their names, Aoyama, Bakugo, and Ishido specifically. Izuku thought that Ishido's hero name was fun and would have been fine. Bakugo and Aoyama's names on the other hand he was in total agreement with. They needed to change. Izuku was a bit stumped on what he wanted to call himself. There were just so many things he could go with, but he wanted something that would capture the spirit of his quirk as well as strike fear into the hearts of villains. Finally he thought of something that he liked. He walked to the front of the class and set his board down for all to see. I am the Skeleton Emperor, Lich King. He stated. That's a bit scary, I think. Midnight objected. Can you elaborate on why you want this name? Well, my quirk works most with my skeletons, so my name needed to reflect that. I figured that if I went with a name like this I would inspire confidence in civilians who would hear that I am the king of the potentially scary creatures that are swarming a crime scene. It would also scare any villains who decide to go against me as they would be reminded that I have a whole army behind me, not to mention my own powers. Izuku explained. Besides, Present Mike already called me the Skeleton King and ruler of the undead during the sports festival. I felt like it would be a good idea to lean into that idea. Midnight thought for a second. Alright, I guess I can understand that. Sure, I'll approve that name. Before I sit back down Izuku interrupted. I feel like Ishido's original name was totally fine. Sure, some people will make the connection, but I feel like they would like the name even more then. That's all. Midnight sighed and scratched the back of her neck. Alright, I guess I'll allow the previous name Ishido. Just remember not to go too far when using inspiration from horror movies. Yay! Ishido leapt from her seat and launched herself to hug Izuku. Thank you, Midori. The class laughed, but Izuku could see that Sue was pouting a little. Something to deal with later, he decided, watching Ida write his own name on his board. For now he had other matters to take care of.